141, Chapter 141. After hiding the person, John retrieved his wand and pretended not to notice Professor Snape's half-smile. He used transfiguration to create a prison. Having magic was undeniably convenient. Sirius Black was locked inside, completely isolated from the outside world. To prevent escape, John also set up monitoring magic. Anyone who tried to open the door would be detected. When he finished, John called up a jet of water with aguamenti and splashed it in Sirius Black's face to wake him. 160. Truth and Truth. The magical world lived like it was still the last century, but in some ways it was painfully convenient. Doused and groggy from the cold water, Sirius Black was disoriented. John the Dungbomb had ruined his sense of smell earlier, so Sirius hadn't noticed Professor Snape approach stealthily. That's why he fell for the ruse. His mind lagged. The voice he heard sounded faintly familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Come on, big fella. Time for your medicine." In his daze, someone pressed a cup to his lips. Still half asleep, Sirius opened his mouth and let it be poured in. He only reacted after he swallowed and looked up to see John holding the cup with an almost tender expression, like someone caring for a patient. The sight of the gaunt, sallow face made him blurt, "Snivelus?" John saw Snape's face grow even colder. Sirius, realizing something was wrong, demanded angrily, "What did you put in that?" "Veritaserum. Didn't I tell you it was time for your medicine?" John said innocently. Sirius's heart dropped. From his point of view, the two in front of him were nothing but schemers, his old-school enemy and a cold, dangerous boy. He'd been in Azkaban for 12 years. The prison had taken its toll. He slumped onto the damp ground and muttered, "I'm not the murderer. It was him, that hidden fellow." He began to shriek like a madman. John, reflexively, slapped him when his face came too close. The blow swelled Sirius' cheek. The slap actually seemed to help wake him up. "It was him. Peter Pettigrew," he cried, eyes bloodshot. Snape sneered. "Peter Pettigrew? You don't remember, that person was killed by you 12 years ago." He looked at John with impatience. "Hand him over to the Aurors. The Dementors will make him remember." At the mention of Dementors, fear flashed over Sirius's face. John only stirred when he heard the name Peter Pettigrew and thought of Ron's rat. Snape took advantage of John's curiosity. He had things he wanted to clear up too, and stepped closer, his expression hard. "Tell me," he said, "who helped you escape Azkaban and get into Hogwarts? Which insider was it? Remus Lupin?" John watched, expecting the name Remus Lupin. But Sirius, under the influence of the potion, struggled to speak. "No, it wasn't Moony. I only have 2 friends here." He resisted answering until the Veritaserum overruled him. "Crookshanks, Tom. They helped me catch Pettigrew." John felt a pang of disappointment at the name Tom and fiddled with the cherrywood wand in his hand. He thought of his dog stealing a wand. If Tom understood human speech, that would be worrying. He asked, "This wand was given to you by Tom, wasn't it?" "No," Sirius said. "It wasn't. It was found near the Humping Willow." John froze. "Not given by Tom. Found near the Humping Willow? Who exactly gave it to you?" he pressed. The answer was the same. The wand had been found. His face darkened. "Professor, has the Veritaserum lost its effect? Should we give him more?" Snape smiled with a cruel edge, produced a small bottle, and pinched Sirius's mouth open. He poured the whole vial down Sirius's throat. Sirius protested in shock and fury, but Snape seemed delighted at the chance to make his old enemy talk. After the second dose, Sirius began to spill everything. The humiliations, the regrets, even petty secrets. John learned the crucial truth. Sirius had not murdered the Potters. The Potter family had used the Fidelius charm. The Secret Keeper is the only one who can reveal the hidden location. Unless the Secret Keeper spoke, even if Voldemort stood at the door, he couldn't find them. James had trusted Sirius to be the Secret Keeper, until Sirius, fearing he'd be a prime target, urged James to change the Secret Keeper to Peter Pettigrew. They trusted Peter completely. Remus was never considered. When Peter betrayed them and faked his death, Sirius was broken. Consumed with guilt and despair, he allowed the Aurors to take him, and he ended up in Azkaban. When he later saw the supposed traitor being celebrated, he escaped, swam across the sea, and came to Hogwarts to set things right. John and Snape listened in silence. If Sirius hadn't learned occlumency, or if the Veritaserum hadn't failed, his words were damning for the Ministry. "Professor, what do you intend to do with him?" John asked first. Snape looked puzzled. John smiled faintly and said, I mean your own past with him. Do you want to settle it? Sirius looked at John. The boy in Slytherin robes spoke in a disarmingly calm voice. No one knows, not even the Aurors, John continued. If we accuse him of attacking students, they'd kill him on the spot, or toss him to the Dementors and let them suck out his soul. Both adult wizards felt a chill. Snape's eyes widened in surprise at John's cold words. Sirius was horrified that the boy knew the truth and yet spoke so calmly. That implied John had little regard for innocent lives. It was terrifying. Snape scolded in a cold voice, John Wick. John shrugged. All right, if the professor is merciful, I'd prefer to keep him secured for now. We still need to verify the facts. Snape's expression softened a little. John didn't voice his darker thoughts. He intended to use Sirius as leverage with the Ministry. 12 years ago's truth was explosive. Peter Pettigrew, once hailed a hero and decorated, might actually be a traitor. Depending on how John played it, he could expose the Ministry and humiliate Rufus Scrimgeour, or he could keep the scandal buried and do Scrimgeour a huge favor. With Snape present, John couldn't be blunt. After securing Sirius, John and Snape walked out of the Forbidden Forest together. Snape strode off briskly, and John watched him go. No matter what, finding Peter Pettigrew was now essential. John absently stroked the ring on his hand. A dark curse sat in that black stone, and through the gem it looked like a flowing ink-black stream. 161. My dog, you've been wronged, and end of term. The celebratory mood from winning the House Cup lasted until the next morning, gradually dampened by classes and homework. In the Slytherin common room, John was still turning over in his mind how his wand had gotten out. Malfoy approached awkwardly, unable to meet John's eyes. John, I have something to tell you, he said, stumbling. John tilted his head, signaling him to continue. Malfoy took a deep breath. Actually, I lost your wand. John blinked. You mean the wand that was taken from my room? Malfoy fidgeted, picked at his fingers, and then couldn't hold it in any longer. The day you asked me to walk the dog, Tom, I thought I'd bring a toy for him. Tom only has one toy, you know. We were playing fetch, and his voice went small. I threw your wand like a stick. I meant it as a chew toy. I used too much force. As he finished speaking, John met Malfoy's murderous glare and flinched. You can't blame me, he blurted. You said the teething stick was in the drawer. How was I supposed to know it was a real wand? John's voice rose. He ground his teeth. I said it was in the drawer below. The truth came out. Malfoy had grabbed the real wand, thinking it was a teething stick, and flung it at the Homping Willow with too much force. When it disappeared, he hadn't bothered to retrieve it. No wonder Tom was so aggrieved. Malfoy had been needlessly tormenting a dog. Malfoy shrank under a dangerous look and forced a thin laugh. Have a little mercy. I did win the Slytherin championship, you know. John smiled coldly. You didn't catch the golden snitch, did you? Malfoy had no answer. In the end, Malfoy's training workload doubled, and John put Heinrich in charge of supervising him. Back in the dormitory, John watched Tom curled in his bed, tail drooped, and wide, dark eyes full of hurt. After several days, John reached over and stroked his head. Poor boy, he sighed. You were wronged. Tom's tail gave a timid wag. His eyes brightened. He leaned in and licked John's palm. John smiled and glanced at the bag of dog food. You didn't take the wand, but you brought the dog food. I haven't forgotten that. The tail froze. Tom immediately lay back down with a resigned little sigh of dog despair. I won't tease you anymore, John told him. You can go out and play, but only in the common room. John stopped trying to treat him like a human. Sirius had been the one to explain Tom's behavior. Crookshanks caught mice dutifully, while Tom only admired the big black dog's looks and kept him happy with food. Sirius insisted Tom had been wrongly accused, so John let it rest. Sirius's information weighed on him. If Sirius Black had truly been wronged and was Harry's godfather, Hagrid had said so, should John tell Harry? No, not yet. Ron would never believe it without solid proof. He'd suspect John of colluding with Sirius. From Ron's view, Scabbers was dead, and Peter Pettigrew didn't simply vanish. An animagus wouldn't be felled so easily by a cat. Sirius, after being forced to take Veritaserum, claimed he had cut off a finger and gone into hiding then, and that Pettigrew was likely hiding now, repeating the old trick. Sirius Black hasn't been caught, John thought. He's not in the castle. he may never come back to Ron. Ron felt like dead weight, stubborn, immovable. John was barely on the same page as Snape either. Snape hadn't exposed John's capture of Sirius, preferring to see how John would handle matters. John decided to test Rufus Scrimgeour's stance. He went down to the Chamber of Secrets and drank the last of his soul potion. As he'd hoped, his right hand healed. He flexed his fingers and picked up a quill with his right hand for the first time in days. He needed a reason to write to the new minister. Buckbeak's failed appeal in London was a modest but telling case. How Scrimgeour handled it would reveal his attitude. John wrote the letter with his right hand and sealed it with Johnny Silverhand's mark. Owls couldn't enter the Chamber of Secrets, so John came up and left the letter at an agreed spot. On his way back to the dormitory, he bumped into Lupin. Something in his pocket nearly tumbled out, and John reflexively saved it. "John Wick, are you all right?" Lupin asked gently. John nodded, stuffed the letter back in his pocket, and kept walking. Lupin smiled to himself and continued on. At the end of term during divination, John peered into a crystal ball and spoke. Professor Trelawney looked satisfied. He glanced toward the usual trio. Hermione wasn't there, probably put off again after their last clash. John had been thinner lately. The strain of work and training had taken a toll. Daphne watched him with concern, then quietly prepared him a bowl of colorful cream-fried rice. He wanted to refuse, but Daphne's eager face won out. He ate without tasting. Some strange residual effect had cost him his sense of taste, but he appreciated the care more than the flavor. From the look of it, the dish had improved. Girls liked bright colors, and Daphne's plating was cheerful, even if the ingredients were unconventional. The Constellation Society was busy. Percy buried himself in NUT prep. The twins were cramming for OOLs. Heinrich, an exchange student, showed no fear thanks to his talent and John's tutoring. Hagrid had switched to gentler lessons, puffskeins to soothe everyone during exam crunch time. It was a welcome change. Puffskeins were genuinely soft. Hagrid, however, was crushed. Buckbeak's execution loomed. John tried to reassure him. "It'll be all right," he said, though privately his stomach tightened. The letter he'd sent to Scrimgeour had gone unanswered. Perhaps the minister truly intended to avoid trouble. John suspected the message between the lines. Follow official procedure. Don't get entangled. Translation: Buckbeak's fate was sealed. John headed to the room of requirement to train. Inside the practice arena, a silver streak cut the air. His newly healed right hand gripped the silver-veined sword, and he moved. The humanoid targets shattered like paper. He murmured to himself, "I am the dragon," and the sword blossomed into flames as the super magic crystal fed it power. The fire surged, swallowing the targets. In moments, they were ash. When the fire retracted and the sword cooled, John examined the crystal. Purple magic pulsed from within. Hairline cracks spidered across its surface. The power was intoxicating and far stronger than a simple fire-making charm, but he knew the risk. The super magic crystal had brittle endurance. Push it too far, and it would detonate like a bomb in a closed space. He had nearly paid for that strength once. He would be careful. A week before exams, Rufus finally replied. His note said he'd only just seen John's letter due to busy ministry duties. John's lips curved in a cold sneer. The excuse was transparent. The minister had no desire for leverage. Between the lines, it read as indifference. Buckbeak would be executed, and Scrimgeour would not interfere. John folded the letter and set it aside. If Scrimgeour wanted to stand alone, let him. John would not pester him further. Instead, he doubled down on finding Pettigrew. The Marauders map ran non-stop now. The moment Pettigrew showed, John would hunt him down. He tossed the teething stick wand into the grass and had Tom fetch it. Sitting calmly in the sun, he toyed with a small badge, the same communicator he'd used to contact Snape. Snape had shrugged the badge off, disdainful. He wouldn't join a student society. The 9th badge still had no owner. John snapped it closed and tucked it away, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 143. He didn't know whether Snape would tell Dumbledore. Sirius Black was locked in the Forbidden Forest, and John visited him from time to time. Despite being confined, Sirius behaved himself. Compared to Azkaban, anywhere else was paradise. Hagrid was still relentless about doing something, and Hermione kept collecting information to help free Buckbeak. John wondered where she found the time, Wasn't she supposed to be buried in exam study? He headed to the library, which was crowded with students. Only a few seats remained. John glanced at the restricted section, but didn't go in. He was there to return books. A few restricted volumes had been overdue. He had finished them and was ready to hand them back. As he set the stack down, Madame Pince's eyebrows rose. She hadn't expected him to have borrowed so many restricted books. With the returns done, John felt ready for exam week. A week passed. June 3rd. The first exam was Transfiguration, questions like turning a teapot into a tortoise. John had to take arithmancy afterward, so he was scheduled first. Professor McGonagall supervised. John drew his wand, performed the required motions, and the orange teapot slowly became a tortoise. "Excellent, Mr. Wick," McGonagall praised. He nodded and moved on. Arithmancy was taught by Septima Vector. Embarrassingly, this was John's first time meeting her in person. She was curious about the student who'd skipped a year. The exam was parchment and quill. John finished without trouble. At lunch, he casually ordered bread and water, but Daphne swapped it for some mango pasta, and John ended up finishing the yellowish dish. "This morning's Transfiguration was so difficult," Malfoy complained, looking dejected. Transfiguration wasn't his strength. Daphne, who excelled at Transfiguration, wasn't bothered. The Charms exam was in the afternoon. Professor Flitwick watched expectantly, as if waiting for John to produce an improved happiness charm. John's partner was Goyle, who laughed in a way that made John want to cry. "Mr. Wick, an excellent happiness charm. Goyle, you still need practice, until you don't turn the happiness charm into a sadness charm." Goyle had clearly failed, but he walked out smiling brightly. Anyone who didn't know better would have thought he'd done very well. John, after finishing charms, went to ancient runes, the easiest subject for him. Professor Bathsheba Babbling looked shocked, her mouth open as though she doubted the difficulty of her own questions. At runes level 5, John could have taught the class. He translated the last paragraph and was done. There was no tension on the first day, just perform at his usual level. At dinner, Daphne chatted about the tough questions, her expression implying she was second or third best. Malfoy looked desperate. As punishment for hiding his lost wand, he'd been ordered to triple his training workload for the rest of the term. The next day, Hagrid surprised John. After learning about so many magical creatures, Hagrid's assessment task was to care for flobberworms and keep them alive for an hour. John watched Hagrid's face and thought, "Don't make it so obvious you're going easy." If left alone, flobberworms wouldn't die in an hour. This was the only exam in the intense week that didn't require much thought. Hagrid even chatted with the trio while checking on the worms. The potions exam in the afternoon brought wails of despair. Malfoy reveled in it, back in his element, looking down on the groaning Gryffindors. The assignment was the confusing concoction, a potion that induces confusion. The hardest part was thickening it, but for John it was simple. He finished first and handed his potion to Snape, who showed no expression and gave him a perfect score without comment. John glanced at Harry, still puzzled over the brew, but decided not to offer a hint. Some saviors must be allowed to keep their dignity, and left the classroom feeling refreshed. That evening, astronomy was held at the top of the highest tower, not far from the divination classroom. The third day of exams brought history of magic, dull as ever. John half suspected Professor Binns could hypnotize people. Even his insomnia couldn't keep him awake through Binns's lecture. The exam asked about medieval witch hunts. Students hunched over parchment, quills scratching in the stuffy room. When he handed his paper in, Professor Binns looked even more decrepit than usual. Herbology in the greenhouse after lunch baked everyone under the hot sun. A Slytherin almost fainted. Afterwards, students fled for cool air like they'd escaped a furnace. Thursday, the last day of exams, Lupin gave the most engaging test, an outdoor obstacle course. John crossed a deep pond filled with grindylows which his deterrents had driven off. A pit full of redcaps stayed put. Hinkypunks in the marsh curled up and hid. Finally, an old box contained a boggart. It transformed into a pile of chocolate rice rolls, and John kicked it back in the box. Get away with your chocolate rice rolls, he thought. Divination and Muggle studies were left. John didn't need to divine anything. He scored full marks. Professor Trelawney, before he left, told him mysteriously that a prophecy was approaching. John caught himself remembering the prophecy he'd made at the start of the year. After answering a Muggle studies question about what a rubber duck was used for, the exam week was done. As he stepped out of the examination room, an owl landed on his arm with a letter from Hagrid. Buckbeak's appeal had failed. "It seems Scrimgeour is determined," Hagrid had written. John stared at the note. Buckbeak injuring someone was neither enormous nor trivial. Hagrid had tried to get the Slytherin student to withdraw the complaint, but to no avail. John suspected Rufus Scrimgeour had done this on purpose. Last time he'd asked for help in saving Hagrid. This time, Scrimgeour might be using Buckbeak to test Johnny Silverhand, deciding what line to take. John snorted. It was distasteful. Chapter 163, Execution and Tick-Tock. Rufus Scrimgeour was anxious. He had sent more Dementors to Hogwarts. He'd made bold promises when he took office, and now, nearly a term in, there was still no sign of Sirius Black. More than a dozen Dementors had gone missing because of Sirius. The Ministry's reputation was in tatters. Scrimgeour needed a victory, capture Sirius Black to remove the word interim from his title and restore the Ministry's face. John encountered a grim-faced Scrimgeour in the castle. The Minister of Magic had arrived flanked by witnesses and executioners from the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. For a magical creature, a visit from the minister was significant. Scrimgeour had an Auror's background and a forceful personality. It was clear his arrival had more than official business behind it. Does he think Johnny Silverhand is unreliable and wants a new backer? John wondered, narrowing his eyes as Scrimgeour headed for the headmaster's office. If John had been minister, he thought, he might have had more say. As things stood, Scrimgeour was only interim and didn't sit well with Dumbledore. A sunset execution, huh? Buckbeak's become a pawn. Reading Hagrid's letter made John feel guilty. "I'll go comfort him later," he promised. He sighed and went to the Constellation Society chamber. The holidays were approaching, and some business still needed attention. On the 4th floor, he paused, looking at the charms he'd left behind. Others had entered the chamber since, but they couldn't see the magic on the wooden door, so John ignored them for the moment. Inside, the firebolt had been serviced and returned to its place. No doubt Malfoy had seen to it. John opened the secret passage to the armory and stepped in. He summoned the Silver Vein Sword. The supermagical crystal now had another crack. He glanced at a new pair of shoes on the table and finished the last adjustments. Putting the shoes on, he looked at the ring of charms. The ring on his right hand had turned as black as ink. The gem was entirely dark, like an abyss. The soul-eating curse cannot be used too often. After watching for a while, John noticed a hairline crack. The ring wasn't a particularly strong container. Magic crystals would splinter if you forced too much power into them, and a ring was even more fragile. He put the Silent Heart and the Ring of Spells he'd acquired during this period into his satchel. Those items weren't sold to just anyone at Silverhand Johnny's shop. Buyers were screened, and even dark wizards could purchase them, but not cheaply. With both items stowed away, the satchel felt significantly heavier. It had an undetectable extension charm, but that didn't make the contents weightless. Nicholas Flamel's alchemical touch had added a levitation charm to the satchel itself, keeping it light on the shoulder. Originally intended for May, it had been given to John as a parting gift when the couple left. He also packed 10 magic crystals, 5 from the Constellation Society chamber, and 5 he'd made himself. With everything secured, John did something unusual. He went to dinner on time. He arrived to find Malfoy, freshly done with exams, blustering about how easy they had been. He sounded as if anyone with hands could do them. John watched him swagger through his meal and then sat down to watch the show. Perhaps John's look was too plainly amused. Malfoy gave a short laugh and sat more properly. No sooner had he done so than John asked, "Have you finished your training tasks?" Malfoy's smile froze. He hadn't expected to be held to training even during finals. Meeting John's gaze, he steeled himself and stammered, "I'll go right now," and bolted. Goyle and Crabbe crammed a couple of mouthfuls of bread in and chased after him. Daphne hadn't expected John to be punctual either. Her own meal hadn't even finished cooking. Seeing her preparing to show off her culinary skills, John hurriedly pretended to be full and shoved bread into his mouth. The three of them had just finished eating, faces anxious as they discussed Hagrid, and left. John followed for a bit, but they didn't notice him. Passing a broom cupboard, he paused. A muffled couple of sighs came from inside. "Which couple is so blatant?" he muttered, peering at the cupboard. "Already dating in a place like this?" He shook his head and moved on. Shortly after, he saw the interim Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, descending the stairs with a sour expression, flanked by two members of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. That delayed John a little. By the time he reached Hagrid's hut, he found Buckbeak tied in the pumpkin patch, and Hagrid inside, obviously in a foul mood. Glass jars breaking inside gave that away. John bowed to Buckbeak, and the hippogriff bowed back. He stepped up to stroke Buckbeak's feathers. He could have taken Buckbeak away now, but that would implicate Hagrid. "Go in peace," John whispered into Buckbeak's ear, his voice cold for an instant. "Broken pieces must be removed." Patting Buckbeak's head, he turned away. He didn't want to go in. He hadn't helped much with the affair and preferred not to face Hagrid. As he left, something in the woods behind the pumpkins made him stop. The trees were unnaturally still. Whatever had been rustling had gone quiet at his approach. Narrowing his eyes, John watched as creatures in the undergrowth froze and retreated. He hesitated, about to check the woods more thoroughly, when he heard a faint ticking. He pulled out a golden pocket watch, glanced at the time, then at the sinking sun over the forbidden forest. Figures were approaching from the direction of the castle, members of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, Scrimgeour, and Dumbledore. With that particular lineup, John didn't think he could fool Dumbledore. He gave up on whatever he'd been about to do and slipped away down another path. As he left, two relieved gasps echoed from the pumpkin patch woods. "How does John always seem to see us?" one voice complained. When the sunset's afterglow filtered through the trees, it revealed two familiar faces, Harry and Hermione, both with bandages. Hermione's eyes glittered fiercely, and a small, sparkling hourglass hung from a gold chain at her throat. She lowered her voice. "Do you remember what Professor Dumbledore said?" Harry blinked, confused. Hermione, sounding like an exasperated mother reminding a scatterbrained child, prompted him. "If all goes well, you'll save more than one innocent life tonight. If you hit obstacles, consider asking for help." She drew a breath. "We need help, Harry." Inside Hagrid's hut, the committee's sentence was being read aloud. "The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures decrees that the hippogriff Buckbeak, hereinafter referred to as the condemned beast, shall be executed at sunset on June 6th, came the formal voice. "Sentenced to decapitation, to be carried out by the executioner appointed by the committee, Walden McNair." Scrimgeour looked gloomy. Dumbledore, by contrast, seemed peculiarly upbeat, amiably guiding Rufus to sit and have tea, as if unconcerned by his earlier reluctance. None of them noticed a figure slip silently out of the trees into the pumpkin patch. Buckbeak bowed to the newcomer and received a bow in return. The hippogriff judged the newcomer safe. "Buckbeak, let's go!" someone hissed, and Buckbeak obliged. Since he was nearby, John decided to check on Sirius. Sirius had been of great use. If he'd been killed or escaped, that mattered. The weather was fair and likely to remain so through the evening. When John reached the spider's nest where Sirius had been confined, something felt wrong. Too wrong. Usually Sirius would have been howling to vent his frustration. Now there was silence. John pushed the door open. The cage was empty. A heap of earth lay in one corner. John's face darkened. Someone had dug out a tunnel. Using a supersense spell, he measured the excavation. Nearly 10 meters tunneled through to the outside. Sirius had escaped. Even though Sirius had spilled many secrets under Veritaserum, that very knowledge now complicated John's leverage against the Ministry. He didn't hesitate further. He left at once to hunt for Sirius. From Harry's point of view, through the Time Turner's borrowed hours, a committee member was shrieking, "Where is that beast? Where is it?" But it was useless. Buckbeak had already been taken. Hagrid sobbed with relief. Dumbledore offered Rufus tea with a tucked-away, triumphant smile. Harry and Hermione ran to the thicket by the Homping Willow and waited. Not long after, Ron burst through, calling, "Go away! Go away! Scabbers, come here!" He was chasing the rat, But Harry's heart stopped. Scabbers was actually Peter Pettigrew. Crookshanks had appeared, startled Scabbers into movement, and in the scramble, Ron tumbled out from under the invisibility cloak. Ron lunged at the rat and nearly fell on top of Hermione and Harry, who appeared almost as suddenly from under the cloak. At that moment, the big black dog, Sirius in his animagus form, shot out of the thicket. His paws barely touched the ground as he leapt, shadow quick, knocking Ron aside. Sirius's eyes locked on Pettigrew, and without hesitation his jaws closed on Ron's right foot with a sickening crunch, a sound of bone breaking. One of the three, Harry, rushed forward to help, kicking at Sirius's left flank hard enough to make the dog grunt. The effort didn't stop Sirius from dragging Ron toward the passage beneath the Whomping Willow. The tree swung in its fury and struck Sirius as he passed, but the dog kept going, pulling Ron into the hidden tunnel. Chaos erupted, shouts, the creak and thud of the willow, the flash of cloaks and the scrape of claws and paws. Somewhere nearby, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Chapter 145, That Really Hurt, and Harry still felt the tremor of fear in him. The three of them slipped into the hollow under the Whomping Willow, and Crookshanks pushed at the knot in the root until the tree was immobilized. They had to wait and see what would happen next, but when Harry noticed Snape rushing over, picking up the invisibility cloak, and somehow knowing the willow's weak spot, he frowned. Hermione, the helper you mentioned, is it John? They still had time, and Harry wasn't going to just sit and wait. He looked at Hermione. She nodded. John doesn't know about our situation. He's outside, and he's our last hope. But how do we find him? He's already gone. Harry hesitated. Hermione didn't know either. She asked about what had happened to him most recently. I'm not sure either, but I think I saw my father. Harry's voice dropped as he went over the memory of the Dementors. There were at least 100 of them. When one bent close to me, a large silver thing shot across the lake and drove them off. That was a Patronus, a real, powerful Patronus, Harry added. Who summoned it? Hermione thought for a moment. Could it be John? As far as I know, only he and Professor Lupin can produce Patronuses like that. Hermione had first suspected John. She'd seen him drive away Dementors before and had wondered whether he'd helped Sirius earlier. In the Shrieking Shack, Sirius had told them with a swollen face that John hadn't helped, had even captured and imprisoned him. Hermione felt ashamed that she doubted him. They talked in whispers while Hagrid, too happy to be subtle, wandered off with an empty wine glass. Harry kept worrying that his father had intervened somehow. They had to postpone the discussion. Buckbeak was restless. It jabbed at Harry's hand with its beak, making him wince and drop the hold, then bounded off into the trees. Harry started to follow, but Hermione held him back. If they acted rashly now, everything might fall apart. Lupin was the first to emerge from the Willow's secret passage, bringing Peter Pettigrew with him, Pettigrew back in human form, and Ron, followed by Sirius and Hermione. Harry almost lunged forward, but Hermione held him tight. Are we just going to watch Pettigrew escape again? Harry snapped. Hermione knew it was hopeless to catch a rat in the dark. Their urgent task was saving lives, not chasing one small, slippery traitor. Reluctantly, Harry was persuaded to stay put. The moon broke from behind the clouds. Lupin froze when he saw it. Too late. It was a full moon. His limbs stiffened and began to change. Panic and terrified noises erupted under the willow. Harry fought the urge to run forward. Hermione's grip kept him anchored. Without her, he thought, they would have fallen apart. She took a deep breath and forced herself not to launch at whatever impulse drove her son. Sirius's swollen human face twisted into a dog's. He lunged at the transforming Lupin and bit, buying time for the others to escape. In the scramble, nobody noticed that Peter Pettigrew had snagged Lupin's wand. By the time they realized, it was too late. Pettigrew used a charm on Ron. Ron shrank and scurried away as a rat, and Pettigrew escaped. From their hidden place, Harry and Hermione watched anxiously as Lupin and Sirius ran out into the night together. Wolf howls and dog barks rose and fell until they resolved into a single, terrible wail. Lupin doubled back toward the willow, and Harry fretted. Why wasn't anyone drawing him away with another howl? Hermione had thought of that already. She cupped her hands and imitated a wolf cub's howl from the edge of the trees. The werewolf's head snapped toward the sound, puzzled. The trick worked. Lupin, confused, abandoned the three near the willow and came trotting toward the false cry. Harry and Hermione slipped away in panic. A worse sight met them through the gaps in the trunks, a dense swarm of Dementors pouring into the sky. Buckbeak, nearby in the forest, saw Lupin and attacked, striking with powerful talons and driving him off. The sudden attack gave them a chance. "Go!" Hermione hissed. Harry grabbed her hand and ran. They rushed for the lakeshore. The moonlight had been blotted out by the Dementors' numbers. Harry stared into the gloom. If his father had appeared, he didn't see him. His counterpart, back on the shore, was struggling under the weight of the Dementors, and soon he could bear it no longer and collapsed. If they delayed any longer, both that Harry and his godfather would die. Harry stepped forward onto the shore and raised his wand. Expecto Patronum. Silver light gathered and took the shape of a stag that charged at the nearest Dementors, driving them back. It was the same image Harry had seen before he blacked out. The feel of it tugged at him. It wasn't his father who had saved him. "Harry!" Hermione's scream snapped him back to the moment. More Dementors bore down. The stag fought bravely, but it could not hold back such a swell of cold forever. A Dementor wheeled toward Sirius, intent on its terrible hunger, while others homed in on Harry and Hermione. Harry fought desperately to keep control of his Patronus. Hermione, thinking quickly, gritted her teeth, raised her wand, and thrust it skyward. Lumos Maxima. A blinding ball of light burst from the tip, shot into the sky, and detonated into a vast flare. "Hermione, what are you doing?" Harry shouted. "Light won't work against Dementors." He assumed she didn't know the Patronus was the only thing that could repel them. But Hermione's eyes were fixed on the sky. She whispered, "John, please see this." More Dementors swarmed in. Their numbers were far beyond 100 now. Just as the stag began to be overwhelmed, a streak of silver appeared high above. An albatross Patronus shot down, pecking and scattering Dementors in its path. "John!" Hermione cried. The albatross carved open a route through the swarm. Following that path, a blazing light hurtled down and struck the center of the lake. The impact sent ripples out to the shore. A sword rose from the water, then a hand gripped its hilt. Long fingers, knuckles prominent, rings of black and silver on the middle and ring fingers. Words in an ancient tongue, or perhaps dragon speech, whispered as he spoke. "I am dragon." The silver blade flared into flame. Purple crystals along its length fed magic into the fire as it swung, and the flames took shape into the body of a dragon that spread its wings and flew. Wherever it passed, the frozen surface thawed. Dementors avoided it, recoiling. Harry and Hermione stared at the impossible sight. The newcomer descended like a falling star, stepping on water, and the dragon formed and wrapped around him. The sword was lit, burning through everything in its path. How had John found them? It was a long story, but the short version was this. After he left the spiders, John had heard a wolf howl. He'd gone to investigate and met Lupin in werewolf form. Just as Lupin lunged, Buckbeak, whom John had thought dead, charged in shouting, "Get off my lawn! Don't hurt the one who bows to me." The werewolf was stunned by the assault and ran off. John was puzzled. Why was Buckbeak unharmed? Then he saw Dementors pouring into the sky. A bright flare in the air caught his eye. Someone had thrown a Lumos Maxima, and it was impossible to ignore. He flew over on Buckbeak, intending only to see what had happened, but when he saw a swarm heading straight for Hermione, he didn't hesitate. And why a sword? He had a mount. It would be fitting, he thought, for a knight to descend with a blade. Ding, challenge mission triggered. Drive away the Dementors. Gain any stat. So stingy. No blessing even, John muttered, landing lightly on the lake's surface. The system's rewards had been miserly this year. Still, he focused on the battle. His dragonfire sword made the Dementors avoid him, though it couldn't destroy them outright yet. The albatross Patronus kept working, and John wondered whether Rufus Scrimgeour had called them all in from Azkaban. To his left, two Dementors lay knocked back on the shore. To his right, Harry and Hermione crouched there. John blinked. Wasn't Harry supposed to be lying on the grass? Was this the boy, or a body double? He had no time to indulge the thought. The Dementors were closing in, and he produced his patrons as well, hissing the charm and driving them away. "John, look out!" Hermione cried as a Dementor dove for him. The albatross darted in and pecked at the creature, pushing it away. The Dementor, annoyed, turned instead toward Sirius. Chapter 146. John watched in disbelief. Are you kidding? How could I let you absorb it? Albatross swooped in to shield Sirius and the other Harry. Whether he was the real one or a decoy, John couldn't tell, while John rushed toward Hermione. The Dementors immediately turned their attention to him. Hermione and Harry were ready to act, but after Harry cast the Patronus charm, he could barely stand. So many Dementors. This is bad. When John landed by the lake, the Dementors swarmed, some recognizing him. All of them wanted to suck out his soul. He decided not to hold back. He raised his right hand. Countless threads spilled from the black ring on his finger. Soul-eating curse. The approaching Dementors were caught in the threads, accompanied by a scalp-tingling scream. Faced with their natural enemy, they did not flee, but surged forward with a single-minded determination to kill John. They understood the danger. If this thing survived, it would become the thing Dementors feared most. They rushed in, and the soul-eating curse coiled around them, devouring them. Hermione watched in stunned silence as black threads restrained the monsters. John moved like a weaver, drawing out pitch-black curses and winding them into balls of thread. Souls collected in clumps around him, but he had no time to sort them. A sharp crack cut through the air. John's face went pale. A fissure spread across the black ring. In seconds, the entire ring was riddled with cracks. As the absorbed curse intensified, the ring broke apart and exploded. The black gem kept pulling at the magic, and John felt something was seriously wrong. The silver ring at once transformed into a silver hand and snatched the black gem. The 6 magic crystals on the limited glove flared at full power, and surging magic formed a cage attempting to trap the mass of curses. With the original container shattered, John was forced to transfer the curse into the glove's limited interior. On the silver arm, thin, nerve-like black threads extended. The curse seeped through his palm. He was losing control. Damn it, now of all times, he gritted, pouring more magic into the glove. The 6 crystals shone a purple light. The change hit him like a punch. The curse behaved as if it had a will, kicking and writhing. The Dementors, no longer attacking, fled in panic. Black threads tore into them. Even as they fled, nearly 20 were consumed. That's good, Hermione cried out, overjoyed to see John still standing. John, let's go. John didn't move. Time was slipping away. Hermione grew anxious. If they didn't leave immediately, they might run into others. They still had to rescue Sirius. She stepped forward to pull John, but he hissed, "Get out of here!" Hermione froze, and a black thread from John's hand shot toward her. She flinched, and in dodging the strike, the time turner in her pocket was hit. The hourglass cracked. Sand spilled out. John felt himself being ripped from time as if expelled from space. Instinctively, he snatched the hourglass with his left hand, while his right still held the soul-eating curse. "Leave quickly. I'll be fine," he said grimly. Even Hermione, usually unflappable, was shaken. Harry grabbed her arm. "Hermione, listen to John," he said, yanking her away. Harry didn't hesitate in crucial moments. He had seen John return safe to the hospital wing before, and Dumbledore's instruction to find John suggested he would be all right now. Across the grounds, someone was emerging from the bushes. Harry didn't want to risk being seen with 2 Johns or 2 Harrys, and he pulled Hermione faster. Once they were gone, John finally freed both hands. The detachment feeling intensified as the sand from the cracked hourglass flowed into him. The scenes around him began to morph wildly. Day flipped to night, then back again. Time magic. The 2 great taboos of the wizarding world, time and soul, were both in John's hands now. The soul-eating curse writhed toward the hourglass, intent on consuming the time turner. It erupted into an overwhelming black tide that swirled around John. Golden sand leaked away, and he was dragged into a cascade of memories and flashes. Scenes jumped at him without warning. First, he saw a black-haired boy hung upside down by 4 Gryffindors, their leader jeering as if about to pull down the boy's trousers. A girl rushed over to stop them. The boy brushed her off with words she didn't expect, and she left broken-hearted. Before he could dwell on how familiar the scene felt, he was yanked forward again. Now a handsome young man was confronting a large figure. "Hagrid, I can't watch you put the school in danger," he shouted. The image collapsed into another, the same young man caressing an ancient book titled Secrets of Advanced Dark Arts, eyes full of covetous hunger. The flashes continued. John saw a defense against the dark arts lesson. During a Bogart exercise, a freckled boy's Bogart turned into an office desk, provoking laughter. The teacher laughed kindly, then suddenly turned and looked straight at John. Those eyes met his. The other person seemed about to speak, but the scene tore away. John was back at the lake, a pile of snapping, biting cabbages rolling toward him. He startled, then jumped again, the stays getting shorter and shorter. The soul-eating curse had threaded itself through the time turner where his fingertips couldn't hold it back. John understood then that he could not escape this on his own. I need a big blast, massive magic to tear me free from the jumps, he thought. He didn't have that kind of power. But he glanced at the silver-veined sword lying nearby. The weapon had been with him through everything. Resolve hardened his face. He was going to go all in. Fred, he shouted, as another jump threw him into a scene where George's voice mingled with explosions. Fred's last moments were lucid, stones and curses flying, and for a breath John thought he heard Fred say his name with surprise. John let go. The unconstrained soul-eating curse enveloped the hourglass. In an instant, it consumed the hourglass and took on a human face. Without hesitation, John seized the silver-veined sword. He gripped it with both hands and drove it forward into that face. On impact, the magic trapped by the supercrystal released. The crystal shattered, the sword cracked, and silver splinters flew off. Centered on John, an enormous magic fluctuation erupted in 4 colors: purple, black, white, and gold, unleashing a titanic explosion. Had it not been dampened by the time field, it might have ripped the whole castle apart. The John in that other scene, before Fred, was swallowed by the blast and vanished. The curses that had been hurtling toward Fred were obliterated. Fred himself was blown away by the shockwave, rather than killed. Time stopped, sound faded, space went dark. A rift opened out of nowhere, narrow but deep enough for one person. John tightened his hold on the silver-veined sword. A portion of the blade had splintered off, only a third remained. The supercrystal at the hilt was gone. The remaining purple glow was pure raw magic. John expected that after such an explosion, even if he survived, he would be mangled. But aside from the glove's shattered magic crystal, he was relatively intact. He hesitated only a moment, then extended the sword into the rift. The instant the blade passed the threshold, the silver-veined sword vanished. Chapter 147. There was no warning, as if the silver-veined sword had never appeared at all. The space around him remained the same. If he didn't go through the crack, he'd be trapped here for. John drew a deep breath, pulled out his wand, and gripped it tightly. He looked down at his left hand and saw a golden mark under the skin. He couldn't rub it away. On the other hand, a black mark had appeared. I have no choice but to go in. Time had no meaning here. He took out his pocket watch. The hands were frozen. Mustering his courage, John stepped toward the fissure. Beyond it lay a void with no up or down, every direction filled with shattered mirror shards. If the bewildering illusion inside had been minimalistic art, this place was the opposite, complex and dazzling. His foot landed on one of the fragments with a metallic creak, as if it might break at any second. It didn't. He stood completely on that shard and kept moving, because there was no obvious exit. His sword was gone. Had it fallen into another part of this place? He walked for who knew how long before he bumped into a mirror. When his fingers brushed the glass, the reflection shifted. Inside the pane, a disheveled man was feverishly tending a cauldron, frantic and wild. His wife came in and cursed at him. He hacked off his own hand and threw it into the pot. She fled screaming. He didn't stop, 10 years of relentless refinement, still dying without having achieved his desire. John moved on and touched another mirror. In it, an alchemist sat with a composed, elegant air, loving husband, kind father, loyal friend. On the surface, a perfect life. Yet every night he disappeared to a hidden chamber piled with alchemical ingredients. His wife died, his son left, a friend returned maimed. The man kept refining until at 50, he died alone in that secret place. One mirrored life followed another. Happy or sorrowful, rich or poor, all of them alchemists who never ceased in pursuit. Then in the next pane, the reflection changed into a man who looked at John with a half-smile. "John Wick, I'm glad you came." John realized this was no mere reflection. The man stepped out of the mirror into the shard-strewn void. He wore feathers like a white bird and held an oak walking stick. He looked barely 20. "You know me?" John asked. "Of course," the man smiled. "I know every alchemist. You're special, arrived here through a time flash." Time flash? John followed him. The last person I saw in the outside world had already turned to bones. Only someone arriving by time flash could make it here. The man's eyes were pink, as if they could see through a person. A simple door appeared before them. Ordinary, yet somehow at odds with the space. The man stopped and bowed slightly. "Call me the Zero Alchemist. This place." He swept an arm toward the door, and his voice took on ceremonial gravity. "This is the Gate of Things. Only alchemists who have reached their peak can come here." John looked at the door. It seemed like nothing, but when he strained his insight, the surface changed. A flood of jumbled code rushed into his mind. His face went pale, and he staggered back 2 steps, panting, unwilling to look again. "To perceive the uniqueness of the Gate of Things, your sensibility is more remarkable than I thought," the Zero Alchemist said, patting John's shoulder with a smile. "Go on, open the Gate of Things and you can have anything: magic, wealth, status." The offer was intoxicating. John met the man's gaze and said coldly, "And the price?" The Zero Alchemist blinked, then spoke plainly. "All prices: an arm, your eyes, your body, even your soul." He smiled again. "You don't seem lacking in choices. The gate is the highest prize for an alchemist, higher than the Philosopher's Stone. You wouldn't give it up." John thought of all he wanted: a way home, an end to the loop. He stepped forward. As he brushed past, something like a sneer flickered at the corner of the man's mouth. John paused, then turned back, voice calm. "The highest prize, you said? Have you seen Nicholas Flamel?" "Flamel?" The man's expression changed. He was genuinely surprised. John didn't wait for more. He lunged, wand gripped in a reverse hold. The man didn't react in time. The tip of the wand tore through his throat with a wet sound. When John pulled it free, the figure staggered and collapsed, incredulous, fury sundered into disbelief. A dark drop fell from the wand. It was not blood, but ink black. John's eyes narrowed. Before he had been dragged into this space, he had seen that face, the mask formed by curses, the face that had tormented him every time he used the soul potion. Extus. The name hit him like a strike. Extus, the creator of the Dementor, was standing before him in this place, wearing the guise of the Zero Alchemist. Extus's arm unraveled into threads of black silk that floated like smoke. He laughed, an ugly bright sound, and said, "John Wick, thanks to you, I am here again. As repayment, I will make you my new masterpiece." John only sneered and tightened his grip on the wand. Extus had been feigning benevolence to trick someone into opening the Gate of Things. Damn him. John thought of all the times Extus had tormented him through the soul potion, the face, the whispers. Extus had been dead. John had wondered why he would create dementors, hurt others with no obvious gain. Now he understood with a cold amusement. Extus had become a curse, an immortal born of accident. As long as he left this space, he would gain full, unbound immortality. It was an absurd, perfect incentive. John laughed, a low sound that grew into something higher. He laughed until the pains reflected a grin he barely recognized. Through his fingers, his eyes glinted with something almost greedy, an expression that made Extus uneasy. The old tormentor liked to be in control. Now he felt observed, studied. "What are you laughing about?" Extus demanded. "Me?" John forced a smile. "I just thought of something wonderful." Extus tried to regain his composure and began to laugh with him, wild and barking. "You know? Then I'll send you into the gate." John waved a hand, still smiling. No, you misunderstand. I was thinking maybe I planned to use it too." A floating mirror glided between them, and when it slid aside, John was gone. Extus's black threads whipped out and shattered a nearby pane, but there was no sign of John. A whisper curled through the shards. "You know, how much is a man who's lived for hundreds of years worth?" Extus stared into the broken reflections and laughed again, but the sound had lost its edge. The void swallowed the echo. Chapter 148. Get out! As the white feathers blackened, Extus felt an uneasy chill crawl up his spine. The feathers scattered into writhing clusters of curses that shot outward. John moved like a wraith, slipping between the mirrors. Each time Extus lunged, John would vanish and reappear elsewhere. Before Extus could recover, John, the silver hand, had already clapped a hand over his mouth and nose. With his left hand, John drove his wand into Extus's neck. Such a wound would have killed any normal man, but Extus was a construct of curses and souls. His eyes bulged, his body burst apart into a black tide that surged toward John. John barely managed to touch a mirror and vanish. The next moment, he reappeared behind a floating mirror. Extus reformed into human shape, pink eyes fixed on him. The wand coiled between John's fingers like a venomous snake. "A wizard without magic. Think there's no other way?" John said casually. "You only came here because of me," Extus snarled. "You were always worthless in life." John's grin was infuriating, and it ignited Extus's rage anew. "When two great taboos converge, the gate of things opens the path to the highest," Extus intoned, voice deep and reverberant. "Beyond it lies the power to mend regrets and grant any desire." John's mind snapped into place. No wonder Extus had created Dementors. The creatures were an alternate route to studying souls, an attempt to gather or purify enough pure essence to force the gate. Extus had failed in life, so he had turned his focus to the Dementors themselves. They were walking soul purifiers, precisely as John had suspected. Extus had simply been unlucky enough to run into someone who was not only a wizard, but a grandmaster in his own right. Extus surged again, blind with fury. John only stepped back, slid behind another mirror, and vanished. Extus smashed mirror after mirror in a frantic search, but John was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, a brutal force slammed into Extus's lower back and sent him staggering forward. He rolled to a stop directly before the gate of things. When he looked up, John stood there smiling, hand on the gate. "As a condition," John said to the gate, "send me back using this being, a composite of soul and curse that does not exist in the human world." The gate of things was like a universal money charm, but for everything: items, favors, even metaphysical concessions. Extus's body, steeped in centuries of effort and cursed power, was a prize far beyond ordinary currencies. At John's words, a black, shadowy arm shot out from the gate and snagged Extus's leg. More hands followed, pulling him inward. Extus clawed at the doorframe, his pink eyes churning to ink black with hatred. "No, I won't let you," he rasped. He roared like a trapped beast. John stepped forward and, with an almost courteous calm, began prying Extus's fingers apart one by one. "Go in peace," he murmured. "I will live well with the conditions you made for me." When only one finger remained, John did not hesitate. He opened it. Extus was dragged into the gate of things with a thunderous slam. On the door a symbol appeared, a tree formed of lines and circles. The gate opened again. Beyond it lay a white expanse, and, standing within that void, 3 doors. One was a white door, representing life and death. One was a golden door, representing past and future. One was a silver door, representing creation. The knowledge of them slid into John's mind the instant he stepped through. At the same moment, the system dinged. Ding. Triggered mission. Choice. Reward any point +1. Blessing determined by the open door. This blessing would not be fixed. It would depend on which door John chose. Standing before the golden door, John realized he could simply open it and return to the precise moment he had disappeared. But another thought flickered. What if he opened more than one? The temptation tightened in him like a fever. He almost lunged for the silver door, greed pushing him, until he saw a line of text above it. "Those who are greedy, selfish, and possess all human vices shall never attain this." Cold sweat prickled down John's spine. He forced himself to step away from the silver door, and steeling his will, he placed his hand on the golden handle. Just as he was about to open it, he felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw a benevolent old man holding his wife's hand. The man's face was filled with relief. A sword arced toward John, glittering. Then the scene broke. John awoke under a star-flecked sky, a shooting star streaking across the heavens. He rolled to his left, fumbled for his wand, and whispered, "Lumos." A soft white light bloomed at the tip. He was back in his own world. The lake by which he lay was quiet. The Dementors had fled. The doubled Harrys were gone. John sat and let the events of the day settle. The Dementors, the curse outbreak, the time shift, Extus, and the gate of things, the pinnacle of alchemy. He closed his eyes and sorted through it all. After a long time, he rose unsteadily to leave. Out of the corner of his eye, something caught the moonlight. A sword embedded in the lake, half submerged, its blade faintly glowing. "Teacher," John said softly. Inside the gate, he had seen Nicholas Flamel, the old man. He had seen Flamel toss the sword. John waited and hauled the blade free. The ruined edge had been mended. As he ran his hand along the silver-veined sword, a rush of exhilaration passed through him, familiar and strange. A thought rose in his mind. Equivalent exchange. Sacrifice one soul, gain one soul. The sword's worth shone clear. Truly befitting the most infamous wizard in history, John said to himself, unable to hide a small, wicked pleasure. The system chimed again. Ding, mission completed. Choice, reward, mission point +1. Blessing, rewinder. Rewinder, can rewind events that occurred within a scene, can rewind objects. John's eyes almost popped. This blessing was powerful, perhaps overpowered. He turned and met a pair of small, terrified eyes peering from the reeds. He recognized them immediately. That rat, Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew had panicked and come here after seeing a golden glow in the lake. He had been reckless. Chapter 168, Silverhand's Visit and the Enraged Interim Minister. We only have 30 minutes before Dumbledore locks up. Hurry. Hermione and Harry pushed Buckbeak faster, but time was collapsing. They saw the executioner at the castle gate, hurrying to alert the Dementors. The window was closing. Buckbeak, a ferret dangling in his beak from some hunting mischief, swooped down. Harry's face lit up. He urged Hermione to mount, and they flew toward the 8th floor, where Sirius waited at the window. Relief flooded Harry until he saw the other figure standing beside Sirius. "It's the Minister of Magic," Hermione breathed. Rufus Scrimgeour stood in the doorway, swaggering with the triumph of someone who believed the capture was already his. "We've been looking for you a long time," he announced. Sirius stared back in silence. Scrimgeour didn't care. Catching him would be a political victory, the kind that could cement his hold on the ministry. He imagined that even Johnny Silverhand would have to watch his step once Scrimgeour was secure. When he'd been head of the Auror office, Scrimgeour had gotten along with Johnny Silverhand. Now that he was minister, he found the man intolerable. If Sirius revealed who had helped him escape Azkaban, Scrimgeour promised leniency. Sirius only scoffed. Harry and Hermione burned with panic. If Scrimgeour didn't leave, they had no chance. Time bled out. The executioner returned in a hurry and whispered something to Scrimgeour. The minister's face changed. He backed out of the room and hurried away. Harry and Hermione didn't wait for anything else. Hermione didn't bother with Alohomora. She cast a blasting curse and shattered the door lock. Even Sirius looked stunned by her ferocity. Without time for words, they thrust Sirius onto Buckbeak and flew. Chapter 149. They ran through the castle at a speed faster than they ever had before. With less than 5 minutes to spare, as they passed the spiral staircase, they heard Scrimgeour's voice carried down the corridor. "Johnny Silverhand came to Hogwarts?" "Without any warning," answered someone. Scrimgeour's footsteps faded, and Harry and Hermione picked up their pace. They narrowly avoided Peeves as they cut around a corner. At the last second, Dumbledore shut the hospital wing door behind them. He turned, unsurprised, a wide smile hidden in his silver beard, and asked softly, "How did it go?" "We did it." Both of them were breathless, one leaning against the wall, the other with a hand on his shoulder. Harry felt his stomach twist as if his insides were about to tie themselves in knots. "You both look tired," Dumbledore said, listening carefully for any sounds from beyond the door. "Right? You two escaped. Go in. I'll lock you in." Old and crafty, Dumbledore was building an alibi for the three of them. Just as they were about to enter, Hermione tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Professor, something happened to John." Dumbledore paused for a moment, then said kindly, "I know. You go in first." After he locked the door, Dumbledore's footsteps elsewhere grew a little quicker. Moments later, a roar echoed distantly. The iron-blooded Auror and interim minister of magic was furious. Harry and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. "Is it about Sirius?" Harry asked. They listened harder and realized the name Silverhand was being thrown around as well. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Silverhand." Dumbledore regarded the famous Johnny Silverhand over the rims of his half-moon spectacles. Johnny, silver mask and green robes, had a deep, hoarse voice as he shook the headmaster's hand. Rufus Scrimgeour's expression nearby was thunderous. Whatever Johnny had said to him earlier had not gone over well. "Excuse me, I must be going. That damned Sirius needs to answer for himself," Scrimgeour snapped, and he marched out with several Aurors and Severus Snape in tow. Only Dumbledore and Johnny remained. Johnny chuckled softly. Headmaster Dumbledore, I hear your school intends to restart the Triwizard Tournament. I'm willing to sponsor a prize. Dumbledore's face betrayed nothing, though he was curious how Johnny had learned of what was still scarcely more than a plan. Sponsorship? He asked calmly. How much did you have in mind? Johnny tapped the table. I've always cared about nurturing young wizards. If you agree, I'll provide 5,000 galleons as prize money. The sum was 5 times the original prize. Dumbledore considered it. Johnny continued, the Silverhand Johnny store will also donate a set from the Gate of Things series and handle all future maintenance. Dumbledore's interest peaked. The Gate of Things set was coveted, even by Aurors, and maintenance, some items needed magical refilling, would be a long-term benefit. After a moment, Dumbledore accepted. Scrimgeour stormed back in with a darker face than before. It was you, wasn't it? He bellowed at Johnny. What has happened? Dumbledore asked, feigning ignorance. You rescued Sirius, Johnny Silverhand. I know it was you, Scrimgeour accused. Johnny shrugged. Since I arrived at Hogwarts, I have not left this room, he said coolly. That is a serious slander, interim minister. The title interim made Scrimgeour's eyes flash redder. Snape reappeared, face grim. Perhaps it was Potter. His little tricks aren't new, he suggested. Scrimgeour had men break into the hospital wing, only to find, because of Dumbledore's preparation, there was nothing to find. Harry, with practiced composure, offered no clues, and the enraged minister was left with nothing to pin on anyone. In the end, Scrimgeour stormed off to search the grounds, humiliated. The Daily Prophet arrived at the same time requesting an interview. Scrimgeour, too ashamed to stay, left in a rage. Johnny said his goodbyes as well. Before he left, he glanced toward the locked door and asked, Is this the savior, Harry Potter? Harry opened his mouth, flustered, but Johnny only shook his head and muttered as he departed, He doesn't look like much. Johnny had arrived in a carriage drawn by 3 winged horses. Inside, he removed his silver mask to reveal a mature face. He complained to the young man sitting opposite him, Sir, please don't have me do this sort of thing again. How did it go with Dumbledore? The young man asked. It was awful, Tangmi replied with a wry expression. My Auror instincts tell me that man is extremely dangerous. In front of him, I feel I have no secrets. I feel the same, Johnny said with a hearty laugh. After they left the Hogwarts grounds, he stepped down from the carriage. Barty Crouch is someone worth knowing. He's extended goodwill. We'll repay him. The Triwizard sponsorship is set. Have Rita make the most of it. And our interim minister. Tangmi waited for the rest. Johnny's gaze fell to a small cage containing a rat that looked as if it were dead. He said meaningfully, I hope he likes this gift. Tangmi nodded in understanding, closed the carriage door, and they drove off. Johnny returned to the castle from the Shrieking Shack. Chapter 169, The Constellation Society Gathering. In the Constellation Society chamber, John bit into an apple and set it on the table. He raised his left hand, and a golden ring of magic appeared, its filigree branching like the patterns on a gate of things. The ring wrapped around the apple. With a gentle twist, the bite mark sealed, and the missing flesh regenerated. Reversion, John murmured. The power drew on the golden sand stored in his body. One reversion consumed half his supply, so he could use it at most twice a day. The golden sand would replenish from his golden mark by the next morning. It was a practical enhancement, if used wisely, almost divine. He looked to his right hand. The black mark there pulsed with an unsettling aura. When he opened his palm, black threads snaked from his fingers and enshrouded the apple. The fruit withered quickly and crumbled to dust, exactly like the soul-eating curse he'd encountered before, but this time without any consciousness of ecstasy. Golden time, black soul, he said to himself. With both magics etched into him, John put the soul-eating ability away for now. On the table sat a finely crafted hourglass, but one of the globes was chipped and all the sand had leaked out. A device that can control time, and Dumbledore gave it to a student? John frowned. He wondered if it was because of the protagonist's halo. He suspected the 3 Hermione sightings might be linked to this very device. He considered using reversion to restore the hourglass, and thus grant himself a machine that could control time. But if he fixed it and Dumbledore reclaimed it, he'd lose any advantage. so he planned to make sure Dumbledore knew it was broken first. As he mulled it over, Constellation Society members began to arrive. John was the first to take his seat and waited the longest. The holidays were just days away, and everyone came willingly and quietly to the round table. Heinrich sat to John's left with Daphne beside him. John's immediate right was empty. Further right sat Cedric, then Neville. When Malfoy arrived, he tried to sit in the empty seat on John's right, but Heinrich's glare sent him to sit next to Daphne instead. Percy arrived late and naturally took that empty seat. Their positions had already been subtly settled. Percy apologized. "Sorry, there's been a lot to do." As head boy and nearly graduated, he had many responsibilities. John nodded. Percy glanced at the damaged hourglass, and for the first time, surprise softened his normally stern features. "A time turner?" he asked. "You recognize it?" John said. Percy hesitated. "Isn't this something a student gets if they take 12 courses?" "Professor Dumbledore applied for it from the Department of Mysteries," John said. In Percy's mind, John was one of the most outstanding students, someone who could plausibly have worked for a time turner, so his assumption made sense. John's face darkened slightly. Apparently, Percy thought it belonged to him. It stung. If the protagonist group had it, fine. But Percy assuming it was John because he wasn't in Gryffindor suggested Dumbledore didn't trust him enough. John swallowed the irritation. He was, after all, under someone else's roof. Dumbledore's choices might be intentional. He calmed himself and smiled. "I'm glad everyone could gather at the Constellation Society. A lot has happened this year. These things have brought us closer." "Neville, I'm very pleased with you. Your discipline has really impressed me," John said, nodding at Neville, who had bulked up enormously. The Sword Saint training had made his arms thicker and more powerful. If Neville kept at it, he might become a brawler, able to tear Death Eaters apart with his bare hands. Neville scratched his head, embarrassed but pleased. John then looked to Cedric. Over this year, the boy had shown a leadership and charisma that set him apart from many others, a quality even the difficult Heinrich respected. John felt vindicated in recruiting him. Malfoy sat somewhat stiffly, his robes hanging loosely but concealing a surprisingly muscular build, 8-pack abs under modest robes. Even the quietest Slytherin could be stronger than appearances suggested. Chapter 150, Daphne, the studious charms queen, handled charms with ease, but her cooking remained dangerously experimental. Heinrich's strength was second only to John's. Percy, on the verge of joining the Ministry of Magic as Barty Crouch's assistant, was John's prime candidate for future ministry work. The Constellation Society's network was finally taking shape, which pleased everyone. A golden goblet appeared before them, and they tapped their cups together. Starlight filtered through the dome overhead and pooled into the goblets. A sweet, golden, mellow liquid filled the cups and released an irresistible scent. John raised his cup. "To the Constellation Society." The others raised their cups in turn. Percy hesitated, opened his mouth, then, seeing the group's happy faces and noticing the wine did not smell like pumpkin juice, decided not to bring up school rules. 1 cup later, Neville was beet red, and Malfoy laughed uproariously before taking a step and stumbling to the floor. Heinrich's expression stayed composed, while Daphne stared at John and giggled inanely. Cedric and Percy exchanged looks. 3 of the 7 had been floored by a single drink. The wine was extraordinary. It brought a pleasant warmth and noticeably replenished a little magic. Cedric tended to Neville, while Heinrich hauled Malfoy to the ground and pinned him. Daphne needed no help. She simply dissolved into ridiculous giggles, her high society composure completely gone. John produced a ring from his pocket, a ring of charms set with magic crystals, and offered it. "When you go to Barty Crouch, you'll serve as his assistant." "John, is this your doing?" Percy asked, stunned. John didn't hide anything. He nodded. "It is." Percy was taken aback and then asked in a low voice, "I know I shouldn't pry, but how did you get involved with the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation?" John smiled enigmatically. "Through certain connections. Once you're Crouch's assistant, you'll see the real me." Percy frowned out of habit. John, cup in hand, paused and looked at him earnestly. "Percy, be humble, but don't be servile. You're a member of the Constellation Society. Don't shrink yourself into a posture of obsequiousness." John said it, because he'd noticed Percy habitually stoop in front of superiors, a leftover from a rigid sense of hierarchy. Humility won't make people remember you. Don't hide your light. Percy lowered his eyes, thinking. The Constellation Society celebration went on until evening. Even rule-abiding Percy joined in the fun, only 1 cup each, but spirits were high. Finally, Neville and Malfoy came to blows when Malfoy refused to accept being ranked below Neville. One boasted astonishing arm size, the other surprising resilience. They fought without wands. In the end, Neville sat astride Malfoy, triumphant. Both were thoroughly drunk, and when they returned to the dormitories, stories began to circulate. Gryffindor whispered that Neville had gone out and beaten a troll until it was black and blue. Once, that would have been laughable. Now Neville's burgeoning brawn made it plausible. Slytherin gossip was even stranger. Someone claimed Malfoy had spent a night with a banshee. Unsurprisingly, Malfoy spent the rest of the night hunting down the instigator. Chapter 170, Lupin's Guess and Hermione's Apology. Since returning, John had hardly left the Constellation Society. When people looked for him, he couldn't be found. He might have been the only one to skip so many classes with such righteous aimlessness. Snape's veins throbbed when he finally saw John. The expression on his face was icily unfriendly. "Mr. Wick, if your brain isn't entirely made of pumpkin juice, you'll remember what you've forgotten," Snape sneered. John was used to it. His head of house was nothing if not sarcastic. He thought for a moment, then asked, "Werewolf?" Snape's faint look confirmed it. He was clearly displeased that Lupin had been hired. If Snape knew the full truth, he'd be furious that Lupin was a professor at all. Black magic defense positions came and went, in his view. John suspected Snape's contempt extended to the Gryffindors he considered hypocritical. "I understand," John said. As he turned to leave, Snape called him back. "John Wick, you left your badge here." John saw the badge on the table and, with an expression that said little, smiled. "I almost forgot." He pocketed it. He had left the badge deliberately to test Snape. Now it seemed Snape preferred not to be entangled with him. John's face twitched with disappointment. If Snape had joined the Constellation Society, he could have saved a lot of trouble. But Snape was a staunch Dumbledore supporter, and that was that. John then walked to the Defense Against the Dark Arts office and knocked. "Come in," Lupin's voice answered. Lupin was grading papers when John entered. The professor's eyes narrowed, and John sat without changing his expression. Lupin set his quill down and studied him. "Mr. Wick, you seem very wary of me," John ventured. From tentative suspicion to outright probing, Lupin's behavior let John see where the professor's thoughts were going. Finally, Lupin looked up, serious. "John, you work for Johnny Silverhand, don't you?" John froze. Had his cover been blown? Lupin watched the momentary halt and gave a bitter smile. "I thought so. From the first time I saw you, I knew you were different." Lupin took a breath and recalled what he had seen at the Silverhand establishment. "John, that man is dangerous. Don't get too involved. Idolizing him will only lead you astray." Idolize? Lead astray? John almost laughed inwardly. Admiring himself? He let the misunderstanding stand. He put on a slightly embarrassed face, as if his secret had been exposed. Then, as if making up his mind, he asked bluntly, "Professor, you're a werewolf, aren't you?" Lupin nodded, as if he'd expected the question. "Yes. I owe some of my stability to Mr. Silverhand's help. I respect him for that, but I cannot be him." He had received a favor and knew Silverhand had crossed certain lines. Lupin had no desire to expose Silverhand or make things worse. "Don't you think it's entirely thanks to him that a werewolf can become a professor?" John pressed. Lupin agreed, but the experience of discrimination had given him a complicated gratitude for what he'd been given. He admitted it, and that was part of why he was conflicted about remaining in the position. "I won't keep the post forever," he said. "Even if Dumbledore asked me to stay, I don't want to." "John," Lupin added, looking at one of his best students, "I sincerely hope you don't become him." "I won't," John said out loud, though inwardly he bristled at the implication, thinking it was absurd. Lupin seemed relieved by his answer. He announced John's marks, and unsurprisingly, they were perfect. John left the tidy office feeling both vindicated and irritated. Lupin's words stung. What did he mean by people like Johnny Silverhand? John believed he was doing good by the wizarding world. From Lupin's perspective, that good came with dangerous compromises. John decided, with some regret, that he probably wouldn't go back to the Silverhand place. Back in the Great Hall, Hermione grabbed John by the sleeve. He expected she'd come for the time turner, so he took out the broken hourglass and said, "Sorry, it's broken." "You needn't apologize." Hermione cut him off, then said, "John, I need to apologize to you." They both froze at once. Hermione recovered first. She looked at the ruined time turner and shook her head quickly. "It's fine. I'll tell Professor I broke it by accident." She met his eyes with guilty urgency. "I'm sorry, John. I doubted you." John blinked. Doubted? When? He had no idea what she meant, but Hermione's apology was earnest. "When Sirius Black came into the Gryffindor common room," she said, "I suspected you'd given him the password." Chapter 151. Hermione spoke with a nervous edge, as if afraid of losing a friend. She could have kept the suspicion to herself. No one would have known, and John would have remained her friend as before. But she couldn't accept that. Friends should be honest, not secretive and suspicious. John fell silent when he heard her. Hermione's palms dampened and her color drained from her face. Was he still angry? Then John chuckled, watching Hermione's expression slowly return, and said earnestly, "Hermione, I accept your apology." Relief washed over her. She stopped paling. "Maybe I have too many secrets," she said. "I find it impossible to be completely open with people." John looked at Hermione, his first friend since he arrived at Hogwarts. Their time together had grown shorter over the years, but their friendship had endured. "But Hermione, I would never hurt a friend," he said gravely. Hermione nodded. She believed him. She swallowed the question that tugged at her about what had happened at the lake. She knew the truth. There could be dangerous. Seeing John back to his usual self was reassurance enough for now. They talked a little about the broken time turner and finally decided to go to Dumbledore together and explain everything. John had tucked an extra long-sleeved shirt under his robes. Though his right hand had recovered, he still looked a little tense as they walked toward the headmaster's office. "Toffee finger biscuits," Hermione said, repeating the password Professor McGonagall had told them. They climbed the spiral staircase. Once inside the office, the familiar sorting hat and the strange silver instruments were there as always. But this time there was something else on the table that made John's pupils narrow. The wand. The Elder Wand. Dumbledore himself did not look surprised to see them. The kindly, silver-haired headmaster greeted them in his usual gentle way. "Miss Granger, Mr. Wick." 2 chairs were already set out. John sat and straightened, meeting Dumbledore's wise eyes. He tensed and closed his mind, drawing on occlumency. Hermione spoke first. "I'm sorry, Professor. I broke the time turner." She spoke boldly, taking responsibility. "It's my fault for being clumsy." Dumbledore's reaction was disarmingly calm. He chuckled and shook his head. "Miss Granger, a thing is a thing. Eventually things break. I'm very glad its damage did not affect you," he added in a tone that reminded Hermione of a kindly grandfather. Then he turned his gaze to John. "Mr. Wick, I'm very glad you accompanied Hermione." After a pause, his expression grew deeper. "I will explain everything to the Ministry of Magic, but this may take some time. Their temporary minister is in trouble." John avoided Dumbledore's eyes, keeping his face impassive. Hermione pressed, curious. "What happened at the ministry?" Dumbledore smiled briefly. "A miscarriage of justice from 12 years ago. I believe today's Daily Prophet will tell you more." Hermione, quick as ever, thought of Sirius Black and could not keep still. She rose to leave, and John followed, but Dumbledore called after him. "John, I hope you can learn to let go of certain things. On the path of magic, not everything is righteous." Dumbledore's tone had turned serious, almost reproachful. John paused, turned, and, puzzled, asked, "Professor Dumbledore, did you only obtain one time turner?" Then he walked away briskly. Dumbledore opened a drawer and looked at a perfectly intact time turner lying inside. He sighed. After John left the headmaster's office, the scandal that Dumbledore had hinted at had already erupted across the school. The magical world changes fast. Fashions and headlines come and go. That night, the Daily Prophet had carried the ministry's announcement that Sirius Black had been captured, and the name Rufus Scrimgeour was praised by many. By morning, the story had flipped. News broke that the ministry's incompetence had allowed Sirius Black to escape. Before people could fully react, Scrimgeour had pressured the prophet to tone down the coverage, but he had underestimated their boldness. He took the podium himself, accusing unnamed parties of ulterior motives and even issuing an order, signed in the minister's name, authorizing the use of unforgivable curses to kill Sirius Black on sight. He denounced the chaos in Nocturne Alley and vowed to use the ministry's power to root out the dark elements there. For a moment, the speech calmed public anger. Then an article titled "Hero, Traitor" swept the wizarding world and everything changed. Peter Pettigrew, long thought dead, a war hero posthumously awarded the Order of Merlin, first class, was presented alive before the Wizengamot. He stood in a cage, disheveled, his small eyes wide and terrified. The revelation was a slap to the ministry's credibility. The accusation that the wrong man had been punished 12 years ago came hard and fast. The man who struck the first, loudest blow was Piers Polkiss, sharp in a suit and trimmed goatee. Standing before the Wizengamot, he pointed at Pettigrew and denounced a 12-year injustice. 12 years, he thundered. For 12 years, the ministry tormented a true hero in Azkaban, while the traitor who caused the Potters' deaths brazenly took the life that belonged to a hero. Polkiss's words painted a grim picture, as if someone had been held under the kiss of dementors for a dozen years. Rufus Scrimgeour sat rigid, fists clenched. He had just issued a kill order, and now the real culprit had been exposed. "This is just your side of the story," Scrimgeour began, but Polkiss went on. "Temporary Minister of Magic," he said with a pointed look. "The man is right here. Question him yourself." He dared to say the name that many still treated as a curse: Voldemort. Lord Voldemort fell 12 years ago. Why would the real traitor hide for 12 years? Why did he pretend to be a rat? The word of the Dark Lord's name sent a ripple through the hall. People whispered. Even years later, many feared to speak the name openly. Polkiss's boldness earned him a reputation for bravery. When Veritaserum was produced, Pettigrew trembled and admitted the truth. The scandal toppled Rufus Scrimgeour. He had not only wrongly condemned a hero, he had ordered a witch or wizard killed in their name. The Daily Prophet's coverage was relentless. Newspapers flew off the stands. Amid the uproar were other stories, reports on Johnny Silverhand's crackdown on Nocturne Alley. Under the pressure of scrutiny, Nocturne Alley turned out to be far tidier than its reputation suggested. The shadowy vendors with hidden faces were gone. The streets were almost as clean as Diagon Alley. The gray industries hadn't vanished so much as been pushed out of sight. Silverhand had imposed strict rules, and without a proper guide, ordinary wizards were unlikely to stumble into illicit services. By the time students were swapping papers in the common room, headlines read bluntly, "Temporary Minister Rufus Scrimgeour resigns. Scrimgeour apologizes for Dementor incident at Hogwarts, reassigned to Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Piers Polkiss appointed head of the Auror office. Amelia Susan Bones a leading candidate for minister, and Peter Pettigrew, stripped of honors, sent to Azkaban." Ron grumbled, incredulous. "I can't believe I used to like Rufus Scrimgeour." Hermione hugged Harry's arm. "That's wonderful, Harry. Sirius was righted." Harry was elated. He had once dreamed of living with his godfather. Sirius's fugitive status had kept that dream out of reach. Now perhaps there was hope he wouldn't have to return to the Dursleys. He was already itching to write to Sirius. Piers Polkiss, Amelia Bones, and Barty Crouch were obvious beneficiaries. Polkiss rose to head the Auror office and reportedly secured a hefty defense fund for it. Sources said the money came from Johnny Silverhand's establishment. Amelia Susan Bones emerged as the most likely candidate for Minister of Magic. Barty Crouch, whose integrity helped uncover the truth, regained respect among his colleagues. The students buzzed with the news. In a single year, 2 ministers had fallen, a minister and then a temporary minister, and the wizarding world was reeling. Harry's eyes skimmed the rest of the Prophet and lingered on the story about Johnny Silverhand's reforms in Nocturne Alley. He remembered Hagrid mentioning Johnny Silverhand and that he had seen him once in the hospital wing. The name stuck in his mind as one of the unexpected faces shaping the changing world. Chapter 152. He was a mysterious wizard. No one had ever seen the face beneath the silver mask. The newspapers praised Mr. Silverhand's generosity, but Lupin didn't trust him. He had warned Harry that the man was dangerous and insisted Harry avoid any contact with him. The last day of term passed, and Harry kept thanking John. If it hadn't been for John, Harry and his godfather might have died. Harry felt ashamed of having suspected John before. He had once wondered about John's money, but Sirius had written that there had never been any talk of money, which left the issue unresolved. Even after his godfather's name was cleared, Harry needed time to recover, not just emotionally but physically. John had kicked him twice in the same place. However, Snape and John had done it. The swelling on his face wouldn't heal with ordinary magic. Add to that Dumbledore's refusal to let him live with his godfather, and Harry nursed a quiet grudge. On the train home, John rode in a carriage while passing Slytherin students watched him with admiring, reluctant glances. The system that had been running in the background finally settled. With the 1 point unused from last semester added in, John now had a total of 8 arbitrary points to spend. Chapter 172, The Muggle World and Watson's Trouble. The train pulled into platform 9 3/4. John said goodbye to his friends. "See you next term, John. I'll definitely learn how to make better food." Daphne waved reluctantly. John hurried on, quickening his pace. When he stepped out of the station, he saw the Wicks waiting with flattering smiles, their faces showing a controlled, uneasy restraint. Mrs. Wick crossed the pavement and hugged him gently. "You've grown taller and thinner," she said, stroking his skinnier cheeks with a pained expression. John scanned for his father. "Where's Dad?" Watson Wick wasn't there. Mrs. Wick's face flickered with a trace of panic, quickly smoothed into an easy expression. "He's waiting at home. He's got a bit of diarrhea," she said softly. "All right, hope he doesn't get fat from eating too much chocolate," John said, accepting her answer without suspicion. They climbed into the car. Harry watched the Wicks with surprise. He hadn't expected them to have changed so much. At Christmas, Harry had once received a surprisingly nice handkerchief from them and figured it was a mistake. Now the family seemed entirely different, which made Harry feel uncomfortably flattered. Mrs. Wick drove carefully. She hated slamming on the brakes like Watson did. It was the first time she'd driven John home alone since he started school, and he felt a little odd about it. Tom rested his head on John's lap while Basil, not in his cage, squinted and hopped onto Tom's back. "I think it's been a while since we all traveled," Mrs. Wick said, gripping the wheel with both hands. As she checked his face in the rearview mirror, she asked, voice calm but edged with nervousness, "How about a trip this holiday?" John didn't care much about the destination. He watched the scenery blur past and replied casually, "Anything's fine with me, but make it a week from now." Hearing that, Mrs. Wick visibly relaxed. John, however, sensed something was off. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel almost unconsciously. When he met her eyes, she quickly looked away. He frowned. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied, forcing calm. Her finger tapping betrayed her. John's gaze lingered a moment before returning to the window. Nothing seemed outwardly wrong, but he knew better than to trust appearances. Before the car reached the house, John saw 2 black cars parked at the curb. Men in the driver's seats smoked, and a burly, suit-clad bodyguard scanned the area. Another muscular man in a tight suit stared straight at them. Mrs. Wick's composure cracked. She muttered softer curses than he'd ever heard from her, then forced a bright smile. "A new Panda Express opened," she said, voice chirping. "You like Chinese food the most. We can try it." The bulging suit man's face darkened. As Mrs. Wick tried to steer John away, harsh voices came from inside the house. "Watson, Fine Wallace trusted you most. Are you going to tell me you knew nothing about his affairs?" "Enough. I'm only his financial manager. I'm not involved in your illegal dealings." Those voices made the air go taut. John watched the man by the black car. His hand rested near his lower back. A figure burst out of the house with a grim expression. John saw him leave with a weapon. The 2 black cars pulled away. When John and Mrs. Wick went in, the house seemed normal, but Watson Wick sat on the sofa with an unusually solemn face. He brightened at the sound of the door, putting on a practiced smile. "Who were those people outside?" John asked. Before Watson could answer, John's gaze drifted to the ceiling. Mrs. Wick followed and saw it too, a bullet hole. She covered her mouth. Watson's smile trembled. Being outsmarted by his son left him oddly hollow. He rubbed his face and tried to explain. Those men were from London. Fine Wallace was killed. Some of his legitimate assets were invested through me. Watson described what had happened. Groups had been coming to claim Wallace's estate. As the family's financial manager, he had refused to hand over money that should go to Wallace's next of kin. The men had gone so far as to threaten to capture Watson's son. John listened without showing surprise. He'd always tried to keep out of the Muggle world's affairs. Intervening could breach the statute of secrecy and cause him trouble. But he also knew his father's line of work: finance, the wealthy, and the inevitable connections to gray area players. Fine Wallace had been a major boss in London whose legitimate enterprises had been managed by Watson. Their closeness made Watson an unofficial advisor. That protection, useful while Fine lived, now painted a target on Watson's back. "Don't worry," Watson said, clapping his hands and putting on a facade of ease. "I'll handle this, and your mother will be under your care from now on." He looked at John with relief and an oddly proud smile. "You've matured." "Handle it?" John thought. He glanced at his father with a strange expression. Watson probably didn't know John was a wizard. Let alone that, unarmed, John was a level 7 expert with short weapons. John could have removed the problem himself, but this was a matter that might embroil his family with dangerous, worldly people. He kept silent. Mrs. Wick picked up her phone. "Who are you calling?" Watson asked, alarmed. "I'm calling Andre." "No, absolutely not," Watson blurted, panic overriding dignity. Mrs. Wick dialed anyway. The voice who answered was not Andre, but Seriosha, her older brother. Hearing him made Mrs. Wick's eyes fill with tears. "Seriosha, she choked out. "Sasha, what is it?" "Say it," came the worried response. The Russian on the phone made the men in the room uncomfortable. Watson's face fell. He imagined his brothers-in-law arriving and knew that would be more terrifying than any bullet. Soon another voice, John's aunt, spoke in a hushed, decisive tone and promised to speak to the men. When the call ended, Mrs. Wick had composed herself. Watson, for once, looked defeated. He muttered about taking up kickboxing too late. There was no refusing the backup. Watson, showing a rare stroke of boldness, booked an overseas trip for John and his wife. But first, Fine Wallace's son called to ask if Watson would attend the funeral tomorrow. John suspected the funeral might be a trap or another gamble. He decided he would go with his father to protect him. Chapter 173, The Muggle World and Dark Wizards. For once, Watson Wick left his flashy red tie at home. He wore a dark tie, combed his hair neatly, and chose a sober, sharp suit. He looked cold and severe in a way that made Mrs. Wick's heart flutter with memories of their courtship. Watson allowed himself the faint curve of a smile that suggested a reckless, indifferent coolness. He looked the part. John wanted to insist on going with him, but Watson hesitated. In the end, he couldn't refuse. Mrs. Maule, Wick's family were already in the air, and if Watson backed out, they would make him pay. Watson didn't fully grasp the scale of his son's abilities, but he did sense that John had grown up. He drove to the airport with John sitting in the back seat. He wore a dark suit, solemn, dignified, and an oddly ornate badge on his chest. The car drove up the drive of Wallace Manor. The bodyguards at the gate saw Watson and waved them through. "Mr. Wick, Sean is waiting for you," one said. A bald, middle-aged butler met father and son as they stepped out. He froze for a moment when he saw John. "My son, don't pay him too much attention," Watson said casually. "Don't keep Sean waiting." Watson carried a briefcase full of contracts, stock holdings, funds, and other investments Fine Wallace had entrusted to him. The butler fell silent and led them through the front hall to the upstairs parlor. John noticed how the other dignitaries who had been chatting fell quiet when Watson entered. Their eyes slid to the stack of documents in his hands, and greed showed on their faces. "My father's in demand," John thought, and memorized their faces. Sean Wallace, Fine's eldest son, looked hollow and exhausted, his grief hanging on his face. He brightened a little when Watson arrived. "Watson, good you're here," he said, grasping Watson's hand hard. There was relief in his eyes. "Those people, any of them could have killed my father. I know you wouldn't." Watson set the contracts on the table. "These are all the investment projects Mr. Wallace entrusted to me," he explained. "There are also shares in several companies and funds held in various accounts." He flipped through documents, each worth hundreds of millions. Sean gave the butler a look. The butler quietly shepherded other staff out of the room until only the three of them remained. Sean leaned in and whispered, "Watson, only you can help me find my father's killer." His voice was earnest, almost pleading. "Father always said you were the person he trusted most. I've always considered you family." Watson felt it. For a moment he was moved, but then he gave a wry smile. "Sean, you know my work. I handle investments." "Watson," Sean cut him off, "help me, and I'll make you Wallace's most respected friend." Watson shook his head. He was good at money, not at untangling the crooked politics of the rich. He declined again. Sean's face hardened. He drew a breath and his tone turned cold and pragmatic. "You control all of my father's legitimate businesses. That's a lot of money, and those men won't let you walk away." Emotion having failed, Sean tried intimidation. "They'll come for what you treasure most. They'll kidnap them, cut off your son's fingers. You know what they're capable of." John's expression flickered. He was still standing in the shadows. The threat felt theatrically unnecessary. Watson's face darkened. He wouldn't risk his family. There was a soft knock from the hallway. Sean had to go preside over the funeral. He straightened, patted Watson's shoulder. "Think about it." Then he moved for the door. A voice cut through the room. "If my father refuses, will Mr. Wallace become another who comes after my family?" It was calm, low. Sean froze, eyes darting. He had thought there were only two in the room. John stepped out from where he'd been standing and stood beside Sean, looking him in the eye. Sean's face blanched. If John were the sort of person Sean feared, he'd already be dead. "Who are you?" Sean started to call for the bodyguards, sweat beading on his back. "John Wick," John said. Slowly, deliberately, he added, "Watson Wick's son, the one you said they'd chop the fingers off." He raised both hands as proof. Sean wanted to ask where John had come from, but Watson cut in. He stood, met Sean's gaze, and said quietly, "Sean, I'll hand over everything Mr. Wallace owned, but I won't get involved in this." Sean's face fell. John stepped aside to clear the doorway, and Sean left sullenly. He still had a eulogy to deliver. Watson escorted John downstairs. They paused by Fine Wallace's body. Fine was old, shot through the forehead. Watson felt the weight of it, a flicker of sadness. John felt almost nothing. His eyes instead found a man across the room and narrowed. He muttered, almost inaudibly, "Wizard?" Among the assembled dignitaries, John had noticed several wizards. The one nearest had half his nose missing, an ugly, almost criminal face. Another turned his head. There was yet another wizard. In all, John counted 5. They kept to themselves and watched others warily. John's assessment was clinical. These were not legitimate aurors. They looked like dark wizards who worked for muggles, neither high nor low in the magical order, probably not exceptionally powerful, but useful for deeds that ordinary people couldn't defend against. For ordinary men, they were terrifying. For John, they were manageable. As the funeral wound down, one guest slipped away. Sean watched that departure with forced restraint. Outside, a burly, black-suited big shot approached Watson, surrounded by 4 or 5 hulking men. His gaze swept John with menace. "Watson, I hope you think carefully," the man said. Watson guided John to the car with a cold face. As they left, John saw the half-nosed wizard standing by the big shot, their conversation punctuated by a cruel smile from the wizard. Something was definitely planned for tonight. At home, Mrs. Wick hugged her son and examined him as if he might break. Over dinner, John ate little and then excused himself to go down to the basement. Watson scratched his head when John left. "Maybe he was spooked today," he said uncertainly. Mrs. Wick fretted over her cooking and then, worried, picked up the phone. She called a friend. "Lucy, you promised to send me that recipe you got from Master Shen, the great chef. I'll pay double." That night, Privet Drive was unusually quiet, just a few cats mewing and distant cars. Vernon Dursley's usual tirades were absent. John had once explained that not attending a magical school didn't mean you lacked magic, and Vernon now lived in wary acceptance. John had made the basement his own over the years. He'd installed a small fireplace linked, oddly enough, to Silver Hand Johnny's office in Nocturne Alley. On the table sat a vial of magic blood and 3 other bottles beside it. The first bottle held something like blood drawn from a boggart. The second contained the blood of Waiwei, a unicorn, an idyllic, tempting offering. The third was from an alchemy Hagrid had raised. Alchemies can change size and might tie to spatial magic. John thought about risks. Quirrell's first-year appearance flashed in his memory, and he wasn't eager to court the dangers of unicorn blood. Alchemy blood wasn't necessary now. It was the boggart that intrigued him most. Its shape-shifting and its legilimency-like qualities could be invaluable. He chose the boggart. The black mist inside its bottle writhed. At John's touch, it merged into the magic blood, which shifted colors, red to pale blue to black and back to red, its texture changing from liquid to a mist. "This is the first time I've seen magic blood like this," John murmured, half to himself. He wondered, briefly and absurdly, if it could be drunk, then put the bottles away. He lit a candle. The scrying mirror on the wall began to spin with a harsh whine. The eye of truth, an alert, flared. Someone had entered the grounds. John tapped the table, and the objects glided into two boxes. The now clear tabletop projected a starry plain and a simple floor plan of the Wick House, the little map he'd built himself, a mimic of the Marauders map made with hominem revelio and a few tracing charms. A footprint pulsed in the living room. John frowned. This footprint wasn't one of his parents or his uncle's. He clicked it, and an image popped up on the table, the dark wizard with half his nose missing, prowling the house, fingers hovering at his wand. The wizard moved slowly, as if searching. He hadn't drawn his wand. An owl on the mantel hooted, and the wizard jumped, startled. Only a fake owl, but it fooled him. He reached out and pinched the owl in disbelief. John couldn't help the small, dry chuckle that escaped him. Chapter 154. John had no patience to watch the show continue. He tapped the coffee table. The table shuddered, swollen and reshaping itself into a huge dog-like tom, which leapt down and clamped onto the dark wizard's foot. There was a sickening crunch as the bones snapped. The dark wizard screamed. John tapped the sofa. It rose up, its armrest turned into two enormous fists and began to pummel the intruder. The blows left the dark wizard dazed and reeling, and he fumbled for his wand as if remembering who he was. A slipper flew with deadly accuracy into his mouth and choked him silent. Finally, the sofa tore off a pillow and pressed it over the dark wizard's face until he stopped struggling. He passed out from lack of oxygen. The sofa sat down again and dusted the pillow thoughtfully. It had saliva on it, so the sofa tossed it into the washing machine to be cleaned. The giant coffee table dog dragged the unconscious dark wizard toward the basement. His head thumped on the steps as he was hauled along. "Go back. There are still some people you need to deal with today," John said without looking up. As the dark wizard was dragged away, John waved his hand, and the dog obediently trotted back and reformed into the coffee table. Half an hour later, more people tried to infiltrate the house. They all met the same fate, bitten by the coffee table, beaten by the sofa, until the basement held several more occupants. 4 wizards, all assassins who had come with real weapons. When the first dark wizard regained consciousness, his wand was already on the table beside him. When the silver-masked figure appeared, he trembled all over. "It seems you know me," a low, hoarse voice said. He could no longer control himself. He prostrated himself on the floor, shaking. Our respected Mr. Silverhand. He dared not look up. Who in the wizarding world didn't know that iconic silver mask? "I found you in a muggle house," the man in the mask said as he stood and looked down at him. "Defoe, tell me, what are you doing?" Defoe, his name, had everything about him exposed in under an hour. He quivered. "Our respected Mr. Silverhand, I have no intention of opposing you." John leaned back into the leather chair, his voice lazy but impossible to ignore. "I remember I already laid down rules. You ignored them without permission. Now tell me, do you respect me?" Defoe swayed, eyes wild. He regretted his greed for the privileges offered by those muggles. Johnny Silverhand hadn't wiped the dark wizards out. He'd organized the chaotic market. The others were content with the arrangement. If it were discovered they'd broken the rules, they would likely end up like those dark wizards expelled from the werewolf community. "Sir, how can I show my loyalty?" Defoe ground out, knelt so hard his nose bled, tears streaking down his face to make himself look more pitiful. John raised his eyes and said, coolly, "Be branded. Prove your loyalty." Branded. Defoe trembled as if cut from silk. A brand was a mark you never recovered from. Still, it was better than death. He was dragged out to be marked. From then on, he would no longer be an enemy of Johnny Silverhand. Compared to the dark wizards destined for Azkaban, Defoe had been given a strange mercy. Tang Mi re-entered after the dark wizards had been dealt with and gave a crisp report. "Sir, the gathering in 7 days is arranged. Invitations have been sent to Lucius Malfoy, Barty Crouch, and the others." He hesitated. "Rufus Scrimgeour. It doesn't matter. He should know his place." "Betrayal has consequences," John cut in. John's eyes lowered. "Piers Polkiss is a clever man. He networks well, manages relationships, and most importantly, knows his place." Tang Mi bowed and then remembered something. "The Ministry of Magic intends to hold Sirius Black accountable for the disappearance of the Dementors. Should we get involved?" John's eyelids flickered. He had almost forgotten how many Dementors he'd eliminated. Dementors didn't reproduce. Losing dozens would be a serious blow to the Ministry. "Have Rita Skeeter run a piece questioning whether the Ministry can effectively manage Dementors. Use the incidents of Dementors attacking wizards at Hogwarts as examples." His expression didn't change. He did not want the fact that he had captured the Dementors exposed. Tang Mi did as he was told. When that was arranged, John moved on to other matters. He returned home through the fireplace and heard a river of Russian chatter before the door even opened. Mrs. Wick beamed, and Watson looked completely dejected. "My dear Yadani, your Uncle Seriosha is here," she announced. Uncle Seriosha's voice filled the room. Square-faced, bristly beard, crew-cut, short-sleeved shirt, a bear of a man. He could have pinned Watson down with one hand. He wasn't alone. Also there were Andrei, Anton, and Alexei, Seriosha's brothers, each radiating a fierce Russian energy. Just then a truck stopped on Privet Drive. The driver made a call. "Watson Wick is back." "Deal with him," came the reply. The driver hung up, opened the back of the truck, and stepped out. Inside were men no one wanted to see. Masks, hammers, steel rods, knives. Guns were unnecessary. They would only attract police attention. The group moved toward the Wick house. Inside, the family was wrapped up in the reunion and unaware of what approached. Seriosha ruffled John's hair with a large hand and grumbled, "Look at our Yanni, wasted away to what?" He scolded the thinness of John's cheeks and then fixed his gaze on Watson, who looked like a scared chick. The look said plainly, "How dare an Englishman treat my nephew this way?" Watson kept shaking his head. What did any of this have to do with him? He wasn't the one in charge. Andrei, the 8th child in the Jovanovich family, had narrow, wolfish eyes and a harsh glare. He too wore a crew cut and gave off a feral intensity. Anton, the 7th, had slicked back his usually messy black hair with gel, an unusual, menacing neatness. Alexei, the 9th, was long-limbed, wore glasses, and looked refined. If John hadn't once seen him spear a wild boar with a javelin as a child, he might have imagined Alexei a university student. Anton's expression shifted, and he quietly slipped out of the room. Alexei caught the movement, cast a look at Anton, then sent a meaningful glance to Andrei. Andrei's grin went sinister, and he cracked his neck. "Yadani, we brought you gifts. Hope you like them." Alexei smiled and gently shepherded Mrs. Wick and Watson toward the living room. Watson didn't sense anything wrong. He just wanted to make himself as small as possible so the Jovanovich uncles wouldn't notice him. John did notice. Alexei's smile had a predator's edge. Being independent where they came from meant you were not to be trifled with. John humored them and called the men uncles, which made Seriosha beam like a man reunited. The Jovanovics had brought a box of vodka. There had originally been several boxes, John thought with a dry private note. If the pilot hadn't been drunk and a right-wing engine hadn't exploded mid-flight, there would have been more than one box left. Watson trembled at the sight of the vodka. He who could once drink 1,000 cups and not fall had never walked out of the Jovanovich house on his own 2 legs. When Alexei cracked the lid open, Mrs. Wick slapped it back down. "Alexei, your brother-in-law wants to have a good 2 bottles with you." Mrs. Wick smiled kindly. If John hadn't been mistaken, he'd seen something that could make a da-da-da sound tucked among the bottles. Guns, not just spirits. Watson was seized and forced to drink. Seriosha flicked a lighter to his glass, bellowed "Oorah!" and downed it in one. John gave Watson a silent thumbs up. Anton and Andrei returned. Andrei's fists were bloody. He joined the boisterous drinking. Anton slipped off to wash his hands, a bestial hunger on his face. Down on Privet Drive, one of the men hired to deal with Watson ran wildly along the street, cursing and as pale as death. He had seen two of the Jovanovich brothers, like devils from hell, take down over a dozen trained subordinates with their bare hands. The hair-gelled brother had gouged a man's eyes out with his fingers. The crew-cut one had smashed another man's head. Blood and broken bones sprayed over the driver, and his legs shook. He stumbled into an alley, fumbled for his phone, and called out, breathless, "Help! Lunatics! 2 lunatics!" A slender hand took the phone from him. A man in glasses placed himself behind the driver, and before the driver could react, grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. "Shh! Quiet!" The bespectacled man scrolled the call history, then pressed a number. A deep voice answered, "Is it done?" The man in glasses smiled, cold as a snake, and said, "We found you." He hung up. The driver's hand trembled. He set the phone down and hung up too. Chapter 155. There was a tiny pinprick on his neck. He lay in the alley, his face turning blue. Seriosha and Watson drank until midnight. Mostly it was Seriosha drinking. Watson drifted in and out of consciousness, roused only to sip before nodding off again. "Things aren't good over there right now," Seriosha mumbled, "but St. Petersburg has a decent mayor this year. Father thinks highly of him. Compared to those officials who devour people without spitting out the bones, he's admirable," someone added. The mayor invited Father to come help, but Father refused, said he was too old. There are always people howling near the house. Valerie went to check and caught 2 suspicious characters, broke 2 wooden sticks on them. "Yadani, do you remember Valerie? He's the uncle who took you winter swimming." Seriosha's words were half drunk and half ramble, but John heard everything. He had just come through turmoil, and everything felt unstable, yet St. Petersburg had managed to get a good mayor this year. The public felt a little warmth in the cold, and grandfather didn't want to manage affairs. He publicly claimed illness. John noticed Alexei leave and come back holding a mobile phone. A noisy truck started up outside. After a while, Anton returned too. None of them said what they'd been doing, but John understood perfectly. Several uncles were sprawled asleep in the living room. John went down to the basement, opened the map playback, and watched what had happened outside. He saw Anton gouge out someone's eyes. He saw Andrei smash a man's head as if he were a mad dog. John sank into uneasy thought. Why do my uncles not seem like ordinary people, he wondered. Smashing a skull with a bare fist and actually shattering it felt unreal. No wonder his father feared them. Watching how they treated human life like dirt, he wondered if the Jovanovic family was legitimate at all. The next day, the uncles left early, saying they were going for a stroll, though taking that box of gifts with them hardly matched a stroll. By lunchtime, they were back, laughing and chattering. Watson greeted them politely, his stomach still tender. Andrei sprawled on the sofa until Mrs. Wick shot him a death glare that had him sitting up straight in an instant. Watson turned on the TV. A news report filled the screen. A large-scale death incident occurred this morning. According to insiders, the deceased were members of a group called the Nigerian Jungle Gang, and their deaths were brutal. Watson stared at the footage, fixated on the black man in the corner of the report, the boss who had once threatened him. The scene on TV was brutal and direct. There was no pixelation to soften it. The police speculated it was a clash between bosses. Seriosha's mouth twitched into a faint smile. John realized his uncles had made their move, clean, decisive. The killings bought Watson temporary peace from the Wallace family's pressure. The London bosses were suddenly nervous and in self-preservation mode, unable to explain where these ruthless people had come from, wiping out another gang and gouging out eyes, tearing at both bodies and spirits. Sean Wallace called. "Watson, we need to talk," his voice heavy. Watson picked up, silent for a moment, then said, "Okay." John had intended to handle these things before his trip, but with his uncles around, he found he didn't have to. By the 7th day of the holiday, the police had discovered a truck full of bodies, and London was in an uproar. Watson was busy, but with Andrei by his side, nothing happened to him. Down in the basement, John shook the bottle of magic blood and drank it in one gulp. He felt nothing at first, but the liquid surged through him. He wasn't worried about magic leaking out. Ever since he tricked Harry, he'd reinforced the basement so no trace of magic could escape. Focusing on a pile of prepared materials, John let the flood of magic run wild through him and into the heap. The materials changed rapidly under the surge. Ding, magic blood ended. Obtained boggart characteristic blessings: panic, myriad forms, insight, mind lock. Panic releases a terrifying aura. Myriad forms strengthens transfiguration. Insight sharpens perception, allows passive sensing of changes in thoughts and emotions, and the ability to probe fears. Mind lock boosts resistance to external mental intrusion, enhancing occlumency. Transfiguration had been enhanced to level 5. Mindlock upgraded John's occlumency, and insight gave him something like legilimency. Except passive, he could perceive emotional fluctuations and glimpse what someone most feared, which could be devastating in combat. John guessed Mindlock came from the boggart's timid nature. The last blessing had been unexpected. As he thought, something bumped his leg. He looked down and saw a tiny furry creature with curved horns, a white body, and a tail that dragged on the ground. It tugged at his pants with tiny claws. John scooped it up by the scruff like a kitten. It was the size of a newborn kitten. When it saw him, it curled its tail over its face, shy, and made a sound like a cow's moo mixed with soft gurgles, almost like snoring. "It worked," John murmured. He set the creature on the table. It nearly rolled off in its excitement. John inspected it clinically. "Complete life signs. Independent consciousness," he said, amused. When he beckoned it, it trotted over, walking on all fours, but often sitting back on its haunches like a child. He stroked its head and muttered, "Seems a bit weak." John flicked his finger and black threads flew from his palm. The little creature recoiled in fear, then, stuck, made a suppressed farting sound and popped up onto John's shoulder, mooing at the black threads. John laughed. He had succeeded, using the rampaging transfiguration magic to fashion a brand new magical creature. "Crumple-horned Snorkack," he said. After playing with the crumple-horned Snorkack for a while, John smiled and set it down. He imagined how delighted Luna would be if he wrote and told her. Too bad there was only one. The surge of magic had produced just a single specimen. He used the chance to upgrade his panel. He didn't want to miss alchemy and runes. If he left them to self-study, he might not reach level 6 by graduation. He spent points and brought both to level 6. He increased greatsword proficiency, which hadn't been touched in a while, to level 6. Shield charm rose to level 5, Patronus charm to level 5. Apparition had already reached level 4 through practice. One more point took it to level 5. After allocating points, he still had 2 spare for later. Current stats: Magic level 4, 3700, 5000. Charms and notable spells: Levitation charm, level 4, Transfiguration, level 5, Dragon form selectable, Disillusionment charm, level 5, Incendio, level 5, Reducto, level 5, Fiendfire, level 4, Occlumency, level 5, Patronus charm, level 5, Shield charm, level 5. Skills and proficiencies: Short weapon proficiency, level 7, Greatsword proficiency, level 6, Firearm proficiency, level 2, Runes proficiency, level 6, Alchemy proficiency, level 6, Ancient magic proficiency, level 3. Blessings: Enhanced physique, quick attack, precision, studious 2.0, pilot, long distance runner, sword dance, night demon, trollbane, night, fire eater, deterrence, hardening, dragon tongue, botanist, diligent learner, foresight, invisibility, insight, seer, soulwalker, retracer, panic, myriad forms, mind lock. He still needed 1,300 magic points to reach the next level. John figured that with steady effort he'd hit it sometime after school started. His wandless casting was improving. He could cast without a wand at about 80% of the spell's power, and his silent spells were getting reliable, so he could act even if his mouth was bound. He tested myriad forms in the basement, gaining more control over transfiguration. He could sprout dragon horns or wings from his back. The crumple-horned Snorkack watched, stunned. When John left the basement, he tucked the little creature into his pocket. Uncle Seriosha grinned and nodded. Tom, the dog, immediately started circling, sniffing the pocket. When the Snorkack touched him, he jumped back. "Can a dog withstand magic?" John asked quietly, watching Tom's reaction. Tom shivered under John's gaze and turned his head. Basil, another animal in the room, was staring too, and hurried to climb onto a cabinet as if to get away. That worrying intelligence didn't fit with the rest of the creatures in the house. John sighed as he opened a letter from Tang Mi. The arrangements for the banquet were complete. He was to attend tomorrow night. He wrote a short reply and went downstairs, where his parents were debating travel plans. Since it was just the two of them, Mrs. Wick wanted to visit America. Watson Wick hesitated, saying they should go somewhere to study how people lived well. Seriosha, his brother-in-law, suggested visiting his wife's family. Alexei objected and insisted on India. He'd heard that swimming in the holy river there could somehow collect the entire periodic table. They bickered, as if they were the ones packing. In the end, Mrs. Wick silenced them all. America was hosting Fashion Week, and that settled it. "John, where do you want to go?" she asked reasonably, knowing to include her son. He shrugged. "Anything's fine. America's good." He was thinking of the intern, Jin, who seemed to be studying at Ilvermorny. Ilvermorny had links to Hogwarts. Its founder descended from Salazar Slytherin, and as a Slytherin, it would be interesting to see. When he said he didn't mind, Mrs. Wick decisively booked the trip for the day after tomorrow. Conveniently, it wouldn't conflict with his banquet. Mother and son had a strange knack for coordinating. Mrs. Wick didn't even call her salon friends to go shopping, and John had already seen Watson puzzling over the bill and calculating whether they'd all live on pasta next month. Middle-aged men simply couldn't afford it. The next day, the crumple-horned snorkack was shoved back into its cabinet. Like a boggart, it preferred dark places. John walked into the basement, used the flu network, and appeared directly in his office. He had set up a private channel separate from the ministry's flu system. He had even considered building a whole exclusive flu network for the Silver Hand Johnny organization, but that idea was set aside for now. No sooner had he appeared than someone knocked. Tang Mi opened the door and stepped in, respectful. "My lord, Lucius is here," he said. John waved him off. A moment later, Lucius Malfoy entered, not looking well. John's voice was steady. "Lucius, my friend, did coming to my banquet trouble you?" Panic flickered across Lucius's face. He glanced around as if checking that the corridor was empty, then closed the door and approached John with barely concealed nervousness. "Mr. Silver Hand, it's reacted." He rolled up his left sleeve to show a mark that hurt him. John raised a hand to quiet him, set aside the ward he'd been holding, cast a silencing charm, and motioned for Lucius to continue. "Since yesterday, the dark mark has been reacting," Lucius said. "It's the Death Eaters calling. They want me back." He forced a plea. "My lord, you must help me this time." Lucius had come straight to Silver Hand Johnny after receiving the summons. In his mind, only John could help him. John had helped him once before, returning him to the Hogwarts Board of Governors and restoring Malfoy's standing. Compared to living in fear beside the Dark Lord, Lucius preferred being aligned with John. John listened without visible alarm. "Don't panic, Lucius," he said. "If you trust me, I want you to answer the Death Eater's call." Lucius felt his heart drop. Had John decided to abandon him? John saw the fear and, with a short laugh, shook his head. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you an opportunity inside them." "An opportunity?" Lucius echoed, stunned. "To completely clear your Death Eater identity," John said. "I can remove that mark, but you have to use it. Go back into their ranks and find your chance." Lucius understood then. John wanted him to be an undercover agent. The price, giving up the mark, was worth it. He agreed. With the assets John now commanded, buying a manor was easy. The former Shafiq Manor was renamed Silver Hand Manor. A number of usually unseen, important figures arrived, each holding an invitation. At the gate stood members of the Silver Hand security team. Retired Aurors, reformed dark wizards, every one of them an elite. Those who came to the banquet were quietly impressed. This force could rival any pureblood family. No wonder Shafiq had been driven out in disgrace. The guests included pureblood families, Ministry of Magic officials, and visiting wizards from abroad. Potion Master Damo Alex wore luxurious robes of sapphire blue and carried a refined cane. A Merlin first-class medal gleamed on his chest. Lucius Malfoy arrived with John, clad in black velvet with a pigeon egg-sized gem on his left hand. Many people who saw him began to reassess Malfoy. More than anything, attention fell on John's silver mask, faces lit with flattery and ingratiating smiles. "I'm very pleased you could all come to my banquet," he said. The silver ring and the emerald on his left hand glittered under the lights. When Silver Hand Johnny spoke, the room fell silent automatically. Barty Crouch was among the guests, watching Lucius intently. Among us are officials, former offenders, scholars, and those who, like gears, keep the magical world turning, John said. Under the ballroom lights, ministry officials, potion masters, former Death Eaters, pure bloods, half-bloods, muggle-borns, werewolves stood together. They might have been enemies in the past, but tonight they gathered because of the King of Nocturne Alley's prestige and because of Mr. Silverhand's generosity. After a passionate speech, John concluded, "Let us toast to the world that has brought us together, to friends who help each other when it matters most, to the anxieties and setbacks of the future. If they don't kill us, they will only make us stronger." He raised his glass. The wine exuded a rich aroma. After one drink, he stepped down from the platform. The banquet was meant not only to consolidate his own power, but to create shared interests among powerful people. Ministry officials would talk to scholars, former dark wizards would clink glasses with past enemies, potion masters would strike deals with suppliers. Every clink, every laugh would bind them closer, centered, of course, on Silverhand Johnny. As long as he existed, those connections would be durable. Piers Polkus, the new head of the Auror office, approached with a glass of wine. "My lord, may I toast with you?" he asked. As John had predicted, Piers knew how to handle himself. He clinked glasses with John respectfully. "The Auror Defense Fund will need to buy a batch of new equipment," he said, playing his part. John was pleased with his protege. "I'll give you a discount. Exclusive to you," he said, with meaning. Piers beamed and raised another glass, drinking quickly until his face reddened. Just as he reached for more, John caught his hand. "Don't be greedy with good wine. There are many people here. Don't get drunk." Piers understood immediately, thanked him profusely, and moved off to circulate. Tang Mi leaned in and whispered to John, "My lord, old Barty is waiting for you in the study." John set his glass down, declined a scholar's invitation, and went to what had been Sean Shafiq's study. Barty Crouch Sr. sat on the sofa there, his gray hair neatly combed, his face drawn with worry. He rose instinctively when John entered, but John pressed a hand to stop him. "Barty, my friend." John sat behind the desk and rubbed the ring on his left hand. "You don't look well. What's troubling you?" Old Barty's expression was conflicted. Seeing the evening's successes had stirred up old resentments. Emotions welled in him. He stood and moved to the desk, voice ragged. "My lord, I made a mistake. I was once so close to the position, but because of my son," he closed his eyes, the memory painful. When Lord Voldemort fell, Barty Crouch Sr., then head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, had been responsible for prosecuting the Death Eaters. That was when he discovered his son was a Death Eater. The discovery shattered him. Even though he impartially ensured his son ended up in Azkaban, he was criticized and lost the chance at the Minister of Magic post. One mistake had led to another. He spoke in a low, hoarse voice. "I made a terrible decision. My wife begged me to save our son. She was willing to sacrifice herself, so I—" Under the guise of visiting their son in Azkaban, his wife had taken Polyjuice Potion and switched identities with Barty Crouch Jr. She died in Azkaban shortly afterward. Everyone believed Barty Jr. had died, unaware that he had actually escaped. Old Barty poured out the confession, and John listened intently. "My friend," John said quietly, "your honesty flatters me. In return for your sincerity, what do you ask of me?" Old Barty hadn't confessed without purpose. John guessed the reason. "I want another chance, my lord." He looked up with eyes full of fighting spirit and reluctant hope. The position he had once lost, derailed by the Peter Pettigrew affair, had returned within reach. He wanted to fight for it again, and he needed John's support. John smiled. "I'm very pleased, old Barty. I've been waiting for you." He stood, took Barty's hand, and said earnestly, "My friend, I will give you the space to show what you can do." Barty was moved. He knew there were other contenders, but John's words were both encouragement and a signal of backing. "The Triwizard Tournament will be a turning point, old Barty," John whispered close to his ear. "I'll help you. We're friends. We're connected by bone, even without blood." Old Barty understood the meaning of that sentence. If anyone found out he was still tied to a Death Eater's son, it would become the next scandal. For now, with John's support and the right timing, he might finally reclaim what he'd lost. Chapter 157. Old Barty's face was a tangle of conflicting emotions. He despised his son, yet somewhere beneath that resentment lingered a father's pride and a grudging belief that perhaps his own failures as a parent had led them here. John read the struggle in his expression and, gently patting his shoulder, said, "If you ever find yourself in trouble, come and find me." Old Barty left the office. John watched his retreating back and murmured to himself, "If it were up to me, I'd hide his son." A moment later, someone slipped in through the study's side door. Golden eyes fixed on John with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "Heinrich," John said, smiling, "your plan was good, but it's not foolproof." The newcomer was Heinrich Edgar. With the Constellation Society's membership now confirmed, John's first move had been to reveal his true identity to Heinrich. As John's loyal follower, Heinrich accepted the revelation. He had already resolved to follow strength, just as his uncle had once followed Lord Voldemort. This man wanted to align himself with the strongest, and John fit that bill. John regarded Heinrich's pale face, out of place in the manor, and added, "I'm heading out on a trip. Interested in coming? I might introduce you to a friend." If Jin Ledisley met Heinrich, it promised to be interesting. Heinrich nodded. He didn't answer to Silverhand Johnny, only to John Wick. At the banquet earlier, opulence and clinking crystal had concealed jagged conversations. Lucius had even run into former Death Eaters and stood talking about the Dark Mark. Beside him, a wizard with half a missing nose and a limp had listened respectfully, introduced by Lucius himself. John had other plans. He believed in investing in youth. Among the people he molded were the likes of Neville and Percy. Jin Ledisley, a student and temporary worker at Silverhand Johnny's, had been one of his protégés. Despite leaving Silverhand Johnny, Jin remained on friendly terms with John. He'd shown uncommon talent, an aptitude for alchemy, and surprising physical strength. Once a dark wizard had tried trouble, and Jin had handled him single-handedly without security. John wanted Jin to host Heinrich during their time in America so the two could be acquainted. Heinrich, of course, knew John's alias and the structure of his organization. Seeing Heinrich's thinly concealed impatience to spar, John just laughed. Using apparition, John and Heinrich left Mount Greylock and reappeared in New York, Heinrich presumably hoping they wouldn't come to blows. Chapter 178. Ilvermorny and Kowalski. By 1945, both the Muggle world and the magical world had ended their wars. Grindelwald fell to Dumbledore. In the Muggle world, World War II ended. Victorious nations like the United States flourished, and that vitality spilled over into American magical life. Ilvermorny, the first American school of magic, sat on the summit of Mount Greylock in Massachusetts. Founded in the 17th century by Isolde Sayre and her husband, it had grown from a small stone cottage into a sprawling castle-like school. Like Hogwarts, Ilvermorny had 4 houses: Thunderbird, Wampus, Horned Serpent, and Pukwudgie, each honoring a different kind of talent. Instead of a sorting hat, students were sorted by standing over the Gordian knot carved into the Great Hall's floor. 4 statues representing the houses would signal their choice. If more than one house welcomed a student, the final decision belonged to the student. Serafina Picquery, former president of the Magical Congress of the United States of America, had been chosen by all 4 houses and had ultimately entered Horned Serpent. It's practically Hogwarts' sister school, people like to say. John and Heinrich arrived as mist was rising off the mountain. Ilvermorny's wards made it invisible to nomads, the American term for non-magical people, so it felt remote and private. John had promised his mother that he would travel while she enjoyed Fashion Week. Mrs. Wick was watching a runway show, so whatever she charged to his account would just have to wait. He and Heinrich ascended the slopes. Heinrich, a talented student who'd learned apparition in his 5th year, had gotten to America via Portkey and then apparition. Durmstrang, where he had studied, hadn't had the same restrictions on underage magic. On the summit, a thestral descended toward them, its shadowed wings cutting the air. A blond, blue-eyed boy with a bright grin rode its back. His hair streamed in the wind. He leapt down and ran toward them with open arms. "Mr. Silverhand, didn't expect to see you here." Jin Ledisley, once a holiday worker at Silverhand Johnny's, looked surprised and pleased. "Even though I left Silverhand Johnny, Mr. Wick, I still consider you a friend," he said, smiling with a dazzling flash of white teeth. He introduced himself to Heinrich with uncontained enthusiasm. Jin Lettisley, Ilvermorny student. Heinrich glanced up coldly and made no move to shake his hand. Unperturbed, Jin grabbed Heinrich's hand and shook it anyway. Heinrich jerked free, then, with evident disdain, wiped his palm on a handkerchief. John took it all in, the bright grin, the faintly mischievous look in Jin's eyes, and couldn't help smiling. Jin was straightforward and earnest on the surface, but John had seen a crafty streak. Still, youth was an asset to be cultivated. John had told Jin to take Heinrich around America. Jin, born into Thunderbird, longed for adventure. It would do both of them good to get to know one another. They apparated away from Mount Greylock and materialized in New York. Heinrich's posture suggested he was bracing for trouble, but none came. New York buzzed with energy. Mrs. Wick, having insisted that John needed to mature by traveling, had delegated the trip and left him to his own devices. Women go shopping and forget everything else, John muttered when he realized his mother had no intention of coming along. He hailed a taxi and wandered through neighborhoods, eventually stopping in the Lower East Side. The area's distinctive buildings and street art made him feel oddly out of place in his suit and vest. He patted his head, half joking to himself about how living in the magical world had changed his sense of style. A small bakery caught his eye. The bell tinkled as he pushed open the door. The place was warm and cozy. Someone young and plump stood behind the counter. The display drew John's attention, loaves and pastries shaped like fantastic creatures. One bread, with large round eyes and long fur, reminded him of a demiguise. Others conjured up images of a rumpins and various other magical beasts. "Are these modeled on magical creatures?" he asked the baker in surprise. The baker blinked, genuinely puzzled. He clearly wasn't a wizard, yet the shapes were uncanny. John scooped up a few items and glanced at the shop sign as he left. Kowalski's Bakery. He wondered whether the bakery had once belonged to a wizard or whether someone with a fondness for magical beasts had inspired the designs. Not long after John left, a freckled teenager barreled in and called to the owner, "Mr. Kowalski, Quentin in?" "Rolf, grab some bread. Your grandpa'll like it," the baker said with a smile. The boy, Rolf Scamander, scratched his head as he took the bag, and John, nearby, realized he had stumbled onto a little corner of magical England in the heart of New York. New York's Chinatown was another delight. The food there hadn't been massaged into blandness to suit modern tastes as it would be in later years. Dishes remained bold and honest. John, notoriously picky, declared most things bland, but he still ate more than usual. The smell and sight of good food had a way of loosening Mrs. Wick's anxiety back home. She'd fretted for years over her son's nearsighted appetite. If a trip could get John to eat properly, she thought, it would be worth it. Mrs. Wick rented an apartment in the city and called Watson every day. Watson urged them to relax. Most of the troublesome matters had been taken care of. Oddly, some of the big bosses who had threatened him recently were turning up dead in strange ways, drowned, victim of accidents, or simply vanished. Watson felt untroubled. Sean, however, kept clinging to the idea that Watson was behind the disappearances, which only reinforced the trust Fine Wallace had placed in Watson. The Wallace family had even offered Watson the position of second-in-command, an invitation that left the usually law-abiding Watson with a headache. And so the city moved around John, a place of small, surprising corners, old loyalties, and new introductions, while he and Heinrich continued to walk a path that would soon knot tighter with friends and enemies alike. Chapter 179, Silverhand, Johnny Branch, and the Snake Lady. Chapter 158. John wasn't sure how he felt about the 2-week overseas trip, but Mrs. Wick was positively delighted. She dragged him around, dressing him up in every style she fancied, and calling it fashion. The hip-hop look, with the enormous gold chain and backwards cap, made John squirm. Of course, there were complications. A woman walking alone inevitably attracted attention, especially a beautiful one. Her little knight had to appear sometimes. John would usually drag troublemakers into an alley and break a few fingers or pull a few teeth. Once he pulled out all the teeth of a small-time thug, the thug assumed a rival gang had done it, and the two sides exchanged gunfire for a while. The neighborhood was unsettled during that period. John took some time to visit the Plymouth community, where an American branch of the Silver Hand Johnny store had opened. The manager was a very beautiful Asian woman, though she had mobility problems and used a wheelchair. Some people had entertained ill intentions because of that, but after two would-be attackers were turned into fools by protective magic, nobody dared make a move openly. A large silver hand emblem dominated the community center. A bronze-skinned, bald security guard stood at the entrance, looking formidable as he scanned everyone. He was the America branch's security, one of Johnny Silverhand's followers, quietly putting down roots across the world. "Johnson, move aside. Who lets people come in like that?" snapped a sullen man in a suit and monocle standing behind him. Johnson glared and moved without a word. The man behind him bristled, took 2 deep breaths, and forced himself not to argue. As a proper salesperson, he should be proactive even if the manager hadn't asked him to solicit business. He adjusted his bow tie and strode out arrogantly. He had appointments with several wizards to discuss deals. John approached the door to Silver Hand Johnny's store. Johnson reached out to stop him. "Are you a student?" he asked bluntly. "There's nothing for students here. You can go look across the street." John smiled. "Why?" "Mr. Silverhand," Johnny said, "we must protect the future flowers of the wizarding world. The items here are dangerous and not suitable for students." Johnson replied, trying to sound patient despite his ferocious expression. That line had actually come from the newspapers. Rita Skeeter had invented it to emphasize Mr. Silverhand Johnny's kindness, and it had won favor among many family wizards. "I'm here to see your manager. Please tell her John is visiting." "Manager?" Johnson eyed him suspiciously, then reached for a hemp rope hung at the entrance. An orchid had grown from the rope, and when it opened a soft mouth, it emitted a gentle voice. "Johnson, what's wrong? Miss Nagini, someone named John is here to see you." "John?" A surprised voice came from the orchid. "Let him in." Johnson hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Inside, various magical props were on display, but John knew these were only the exhibits. The American branch had been set up as a locally styled arms shop. Each counter was enchanted to hide unregistered wands and offensive magical items. A few customers in the store wore enchanted monocles. Only with those could one see items tucked under the counter. 3 salespeople were explaining products. 2 security guards stood by a door to the deeper area, and spotting John, rose and opened it as if they'd been expecting him. Beyond that door was a hidden room that felt like a private parlor. Nagini sat there in an emerald green dress, in a wheelchair that moved on its own. "John, you're here," she greeted, visibly pleased. She looked at him with concern. "You've lost weight. You shouldn't overwork yourself." "It's nothing, just a small matter." John walked over and looked her over. The chaotic particles that had shimmered on Nagini's body were gone. "Good recovery," he said with a smile. "Are you settling into managing things here?" Letting Nagini develop in the American wizarding world had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. The plan had been to open branches worldwide, and this was the first test site. John had told her she could come to him if she ran into trouble, but Nagini had quietly carved out her own foothold. "It's all thanks to your reputation," she said softly, smiling. "The wizards here share your philosophy. They believe in the strong. Using your name, I quickly gathered a following." "Someone caused trouble, but the ring you gave me saved me," she added, stroking an emerald ring on her finger. Once someone had pressed a wand to her head, the ring's protection had activated and turned the attacker into an idiot. That incident earned her the local title, Snake Lady. She usually seemed calm, but her venom surprised people. John reached for a bottle of red wine from a cabinet. Nagini snatched it away. "John, you're not an adult yet. You can't drink," she scolded earnestly. "You're just like my mother," John muttered, embarrassed. Nagini was probably his grandmother's generation, strictly speaking. He let her keep the bottle and pulled a long box from his small bag. "I haven't given you a gift for the store opening." He handed the box to Nagini with a laugh. Her curiosity won out. She slid off the lid to reveal an exquisite wand resting on velvet. It was black, 11¼ inches long, with dense grain and excellent flexibility. The tip had a spiral pattern and was set with a sapphire. Nagini's admiration was obvious. "You would with thestral tail hair," John said. "This wand is for someone who has been reborn. The tip contains a philosopher's stone. I made it. It amplifies charms and helps heal the body. John's philosopher's stone was a new creation, an alternative super-magical crystal approaching the legendary philosopher's stone. It could increase the power of charms, absorb attacks and convert them into magical feedback for the wielder, and served as a large magical storage device. Apart from the ability to create the elixir of life or transmute base metals into gold, it was effectively a weaker but still powerful version of the philosopher's stone. Nagini ran a hand along the wand and noticed an inscription on the handle. This item celebrates Nagini's rebirth. She was deeply moved. Who could understand the suffering she had endured during those years as a snake? Reborn, she couldn't hold back tears. Holding the wand, she smiled through them. "John, thank you," she said, softly and repeatedly, as if the words were never enough. John rubbed his nose, a little embarrassed, and produced a few more items from his bag, various of-series accessories that suited her newly human state. Nagini, who hadn't worn jewelry before, suddenly looked like a model in display. He also set down a stack of books. "These will help you improve your charms quickly," he said. Now that she had her human form back and the blood curse removed, she could learn magic properly. John didn't want to miss the chance to have her study diligently. With her soul still healing, she would be able to walk again in time. She had lost so much of her soul that recovery would be slow. Relying only on unicorn horn would take ages. John even considered the grim option of capturing dementors to harvest soul-related ingredients for future potions. Managing the silver hand, Johnny's store alone was a lot for Nagini, and John planned to have Jin Lettisley help out. But there were other matters to resolve first: Ministry Auror patrols, subtle sabotage, outright attempts to eliminate Nagini. The store's profits were enormous. Envy was inevitable. John wanted to deal with these threats before they became real problems. Later, John sat in the Blind Pig bar, wearing a silver mask, while a trembling goblin across from him spat out a dozen names. "Respected Mr. Silverhand Johnny, I have no intention of being your enemy," the goblin stammered. The Blind Pig was an underground bar in New York where all kinds of information flowed and rogues gathered. The owner, a goblin, had been the biggest local figure. But when Silverhand Johnny had just walked in, 3 wizards who had made a move were stunned. The owner's soul was even pulled out and then stuffed back in, an experience that wiped the smugness from his face and left him desperate to avoid anything remotely like it again. The Blind Pig was normally noisy. Tonight, it was empty. Transfigured tables had been rearranged into a long one, and the goblin owner, sweating, served drinks with a fawning smile. He had invited everyone who had targeted the Silverhand Johnny store at instruction because he still had pull. He didn't know what the other party intended to do. He only knew the man at the head of the table was extremely dangerous. After a short while, several sounds echoed through the Blind Pig bar. Chapter 159, figures apparated into the Blind Pig one after another, clearly not expecting to be the only ones summoned by the goblin boss. The wizards who appeared looked at each other. One, short-tempered, cursed. "Damn it, Bobby! What are you doing?" Bobby was the goblin boss. Normally, he would have cursed back, but now Bobby acted like he hadn't noticed. "Sit down," said a voice that brooked no argument. There were 13 wizards in all, men who managed various underground dealings across New York's wizarding world. At the sound of the voice, the same hot-headed wizard spat. "Who are you? Why should we listen to you?" Some of them showed obvious disdain, as if they enjoyed watching whoever sat at the mask's other end make a fool of himself. But then the voice cut in again. "I said, sit down." A powerful presence rolled out from John like a predator measuring its prey. An instinctive chill ran through the room. John tilted his head, his voice low and calm. "If you don't need chairs, I'll plant a fresh flower on your grave." They all recognized the silver mask. Fear tightened in their throats. They knew who wore it, and why they had planned to take over the shops run by that person. Reluctantly, they seated themselves along the long table, each one careful not to sit at the far end facing the mask. The short-tempered wizard, pushed into the last seat, looked furious and pale. John rapped his knuckles on the ring at his finger. "My father used to say business shouldn't be made too rigid," he said in a deep voice. "Perhaps my shop has offended your interests. For that, I apologize." The apology left them bewildered. This was the man who had driven the Shafiq family out of Britain. How could he be so meek? The short-tempered wizard sneered. "Good. I'm not unreasonable either. Rujak, hand over half the shop's goods, and I'll see you out with dignity." He felt powerful speaking, lifting his chin and gazing toward the masked figure through his nostrils. John laughed once, a low chuckle that set everyone on edge. "I do intend to let some of you act as agents for my goods," he replied. "They will be sold at 20% below market price." The offer brightened their eyes. Silverhand Johnny's goods were famously in demand. Even at half price, they had trouble keeping up with orders. Getting them at 20% under market was a fortune to be made. Just as they began to regard Johnny as reasonable, his tone changed. He looked directly at the hot-headed man and bared an expression that felt like a warning. "I will not disrupt the division of New York's 13th district," he said quietly. "But I do need an area to open a shop. Can you show me some sincerity?" Everyone saw the chill in John's gaze. The hot-tempered wizard's smugness froze. He realized the room had shifted on an axis. John leaned back, composed. "You may begin." "You wouldn't, would you? He's just a foreigner." The hot-tempered wizard shouted, as if volume could give him safety. He turned to an ally. "We'll deal with him. His goods will still be ours." The ally's smile froze as a red light lanced from a wand and struck the hot-tempered wizard. In an instant, a dozen wands flared. Under the hail of spells, the hot-tempered man crumpled, his breath leaving him. "Now, we can talk about the shares," John said, unhurried. He snapped his fingers, and the 13th chair seemed to dissolve into a white blossom that settled on the dead man's chest. Fingers interlaced beneath his mask, John continued. "Silverhand Johnny will provide 30% of the goods as shares for the 12 districts, drinks, potions, equipment included." A wizard to John's right shrieked, 30%? We just killed a man for you, and it's only 30%. He looked outraged. John tapped the ring again. A faint magical ripple swelled outward, and shackles rose from the floor, clamping the wizards to their seats. "Fuck!" one cursed, but it was useless. John rose and walked to the dissenter, who tried to change his expression into one of bravado. The man's smile died when John set a wand against his shoulder, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "Shh! Soul, come back." White smoke seeped from the wizard's mouth. Bobby the goblin, who had watched from the side, sagged to his knees, remembering the same treatment he'd received not long before. Under everyone's horrified eyes, the white smoke coalesced into a shape drawn out of the wizard's body. The man's arrogance quit him. Terror flooded his features. The eyes beneath the silver mask seemed to narrow into vertical slits as John pressed, voice low and terrible, "Tell me, why did you resist me?" "Mr. Johnny Silverhand, I didn't mean to offend," the wizard stammered, voice shattering. The others were rigid with horror as John's magic took hold. One by one, white smoke began to rise from their bodies. They struggled, wands flailing, but John calmly drew 12 souls at once. When done, he returned them in order, leaving a brand on each man like a mark of ownership. "You know Johnny Silverhand never treats his friends unfairly." He released the binds. For a moment, all 12 wands swung toward him. John only raised his eyes and said, clear and cold, "Put them down." Their hands dropped as if welded by some unseen force. Terror and confusion warred across their faces. John moved toward the door without looking back. 30% will be divided among you 12, he said. "I won't be unfair to friends, nor will I be soft on enemies." As he passed the hot-tempered wizard's corpse, he snapped his left fingers. The body flared into flame and turned to ash. "Bobby, clean him up." Bobby hurried with a broom and swept away the ashes. When the blind pig's door closed behind them, the curses and anger that had lingered inside were corralled and contained. From that day on, New York's underground wizards quietly cleared out everyone who had belonged to the dead man. The next day, they received their 30% of the goods from the Silverhand Johnny store. At first, they had thought 30% paltry. They had badly underestimated it. The share was more than enough to yield huge profits, so large that those who had opposed Johnny Silverhand rued their decision. Nagini's star rose fast in New York. Everyone wanted to make contact with her. Merely meeting her was something to brag about. That attention pulled much of the Ministry of Magic's focus away from her and toward the other 12 districts, exactly the diversion John had intended. Leaving those wizards alive had reduced the likelihood they'd cause trouble and had shifted official scrutiny away from Nagini. She found out a week later and wrote to John to thank him. Her letter arrived the same day as another, Fleur's. Quidditch World Cup? Seeing Fleur's invitation, John remembered the ticket Barty Crouch had given him. A noisy commotion came from downstairs. Andre, no doubt, had gotten Mrs. Wick riled. John had only just returned from America to find Mrs. Wick obsessing over a new recipe she claimed had come from a master chef. She'd been trying to perfect her cooking. Uncle Andre meant to help, but kept making a mess. Watson Wick's affairs were nearly settled, though rumors had been swirling that the Wick family were the hidden power in London. He didn't know how it had all been smoothed over, but Watson was now talked about as the new underground king of London, a role that brought him more headaches than benefits. Uncle Seriosha soothed him with a drink when it got to be too much. London's power structure had been shaken, and the big players kept their heads down. A gypsy wanderer had come to Watson seeking help. His son was accused of killing Fine Wallace, and Sean Wallace was hunting them. The wanderer's evidence suggested there was someone behind the murder who'd paid $20,000 to remove a famous figure. Life felt fragile. Watson called Sean, discussing investors and the like, but the call ended in frustration. The Jovanovich four brothers remained calm through it all. John wasn't worried. His uncles could handle it. He had other things on his mind. Advertising for Silverhand Johnny. Magic had ads too, and the Quidditch World Cup was a perfect placement. John used contacts to get a spot through Barty Crouch. With the Minister of Magic's position vacant, Barty, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, was managing the cup and eager to boost his standing. Silverhand Johnny's investment came at the right time, and John offered preferential prices on small items. He let Mundungus handle the ad negotiation. Mundungus's talent for bargaining and bending rules was exactly what was needed when dealing with ministry officials. John called Tang Mi into his office with another assignment. Betting? Tang Mi asked, surprised. It isn't done openly, but there's a lot behind the scenes. Good, John smiled. Many will want to gamble on those matches. And you want us to? John nodded toward the crystal ball on the table. Control the odds. We'll make a lot of money on the condition that we know the outcome. Chapter 160. In the crystal ball, the Irish team lifted the cup. Tang Mi knew exactly how much money that meant. The Quidditch World Cup drew at least 50 to 60,000, often many more. If each spectator put up 10 galleons, it would be an astronomical sum. Handling that kind of money required trustworthy people, so Tang Mi took a few of his men and went to the Department of Magical Games and Sports. He could have opened the betting discreetly, but there was no need. Letting a little profit slip out would save him a lot of trouble. Johnny wouldn't care about the amount. The application moved surprisingly fast. Ludo Bagman, head of the department, was ecstatic when Tang Mi told him about the odds. He even asked, with a greedy twinkle, whether there were any special concessions for officials placing bets. Ludo Bagman's a gambler, Tang Mi explained with a small shake of his head as he filed the report. He's lost everything at least once, but he's kept his passion for it. He used to be the best beater for the Wimborne Wasps, though these days you could fit a whole barrel in his belly. You know him? Johnny's voice carried another tone. Tang Mi hesitated, then admitted, I used to be a Wimborne Wasps fan, back when Oz and Rippy and I still worked at the ministry. Thinking of that past made Tang Mi a little wistful. If he hadn't been bitten by a werewolf, he might still be slogging for a promotion in the ministry. This trip had reunited him with old acquaintances, Oz Heald and Rippy Cabayer, who were stuck in the same posts as before, and Tang Mi felt the weight of wasted ambition. Johnny glanced over the ministry paperwork, still not looking up. You can go see your friends properly now, he said. You don't have to hide anymore, do you? Tang Mi froze. After Johnny confirmed the document and put it away, he looked at Tang Mi, at once amused and gentle. You haven't gone to find them all day, have you? Embarrassed, Tang Mi scratched his head and flushed like a shy boy. He started for the fireplace, and Johnny gave him room. I don't mind you having friends, Tang Mi. Everyone has a life. I'm not trying to control that. Blue flames licked up around Johnny, and he vanished from the office. Tang Mi pictured Johnny's bright face once they had been inseparable. Before the werewolf bite, Tang Mi had never imagined they'd drift apart. Now he resolved to reconnect. He left the Silverhand Johnny's shop without hearing his subordinates call after him, went into a flower shop, and rather awkwardly bought a bouquet. "It's been so long," he muttered. "At least take something." Elsewhere on Privet Drive, Dudley Dursley had been on a diet. Johnny often saw him jogging along the street, sprinting past his own house as if a dog were nipping at his heels. Aside from the oddball incident when Watson found an eyeball while mowing the lawn a few days earlier, Dudley's new behavior was largely down to his 4 fierce uncles and the impression the Wick family had made. On holiday, several cars had disgorged men who looked like they belonged in prison. The Dursleys had decided the Wicks were important people. Harry's treatment at number 4 had improved. Uncle Vernon no longer shouted at the drop of a hat, though sometimes his roar would slip out and be followed by an awkward, fearful apology. Aunt Petunia stopped scowling all the time. When she bought Harry new clothes, he suspected they were under an imperious curse. Harry's door was unlocked again, and he no longer had to smuggle or tense over homework. But because Dudley's diet required company, Harry had been eating vegetables for a month and was miserable. He wrote often to his friends, pleading for tasty parcels, careful to keep the letters hidden from Dudley. Dudley himself, unable to curb his appetite, would occasionally stumble sleepwalk-style to the kitchen only to find nothing in the fridge and almost cry. Harry suggested he go to Johnny's. There would be food there in abundance. Dudley considered it, then shuddered. Childhood trauma won out. He remembered the time 3 kids had nabbed Johnny's Heavenly Dynasty dumplings, and Johnny had made a child's hand vanish with a pencil trick. Dudley had been haunted by the incident for weeks, dreaming, "Pencil, stay away," and sleeping with his parents for a month. Harry's correspondence, meanwhile, was mostly to his godfather Sirius. Hedwig, once plump, had slimmed from constant flights. Basil, Harry's other owl, loved perching by the window and laughing scornfully at Hedwig's busy wings. If they'd had any more room, the 2 snowy owls might have fought. Harry's birthday came around as usual. Hagrid, Hermione, Ron, and Sirius sent him 4 large cakes. It was a rare, bright day for him. But back at the Silverhand Johnny shop, the atmosphere turned heavy as Johnny read the Daily Prophet. "The Ministry lost Peter Pettigrew?" he said aloud. Pierce looked up, frightened. A week after arriving at Azkaban, Peter Pettigrew disappeared. "He escaped," Johnny said flatly, laying the paper down. Typical of a rat. He should have expected it. If Sirius could escape, Pettigrew could too. Chapter 182, Invitations and Invitations. Peter Pettigrew's disappearance from Azkaban left no trace. Unlike Sirius, Pettigrew seemed to have evaporated. The Ministry had been leaderless for a time, and Pettigrew had slipped through in that chaos. Pierce feared the fallout would jeopardize his position as head of the Auror office. "Don't worry," Johnny told him. "This won't affect you." Relieved by Johnny's reassurance, Pierce relaxed. The Aurors had done their duty. The escape was Azkaban's problem. The Ministry, however, needed a scapegoat. After earlier incidents where Dementors had harmed students, many officials already questioned their effectiveness. With Pettigrew's escape, the debate intensified. Were the Dementors still suitable guardians? Any decision would have to wait for a new Minister of Magic, but in the meantime, the Ministry did not hesitate to blame the Dementors. Rita Skeeter seized the moment. Her recent sensational articles had made her a rising force at the Daily Prophet, and under Johnny's direction and with subtle Ministry nudges, she launched a fierce campaign. "Do uncontrolled Dementors need to stay?" The headline screamed, blaming Pettigrew's escape on the Dementors' alleged inaction. The wizarding world erupted. Petitions and letters flooded the Ministry, demanding the Dementors' dismissal. Had the Quidditch World Cup not been monopolizing the headlines, tens of thousands might have signed a petition. Barty Crouch used the cup as a spotlight to remind everyone he existed. He was busy negotiating with overseas ministers of magic about allocations and seats. The Bulgarian ministry was particularly demanding. Although not at the center of things, Barty's post was extremely visible right now. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement and officials like Amelia Bones felt sidelined. Heinrich came to the Silverhand Johnny shop next. Johnny wanted to say, "You had a good time at Ilvermorny," but Heinrich's dark mood stopped him. Johnny asked, "How are things with Jin?" Bringing up Jin made Heinrich sigh. Even the Weasley twins had never vexed him like this. Heinrich's voice tightened. "I hate that person." Jin Lettisley was Heinrich's opposite. Bright, warm, always around like sunlight, which made Heinrich, the vampire who loathed daylight, feel blinded and uncomfortable. Jin appeared wherever Heinrich was. His endless cheer and the way he seemed to counter Heinrich's every move made their time together unbearable. They'd clashed. Johnny guessed they'd dueled. Heinrich confirmed it. He specialized in jinxes and dark arts. Jin was a perfected student of defense against the dark arts. Heinrich favored fire spells. Jin specialized in extinguishing magic. Facing Jin left Heinrich frustrated and determined to train harder. Johnny looked at him and sighed. "All right, I've got Quidditch World Cup tickets. Want to go with me?" Heinrich's face twisted with barely suppressed disgust. That guy gave me one. So the spare ticket was harder to offload than Johnny thought. He thought through friends. Fleur would go with Beauxbatons. Hermione and Harry were already arranged with the Weasleys. Luna would be with her father. Neville would be with his parents at the hospital. And Cedric would be with his father. Malfoy had been messaging everyone as soon as he got his ticket. Johnny tapped his badge and 8 names appeared. He selected Daphne. A moment later, Daphne replied in a rushed hand, "That's wonderful, Johnny. I'd love to go. Thank you for the invite." "See you at the Quidditch World Cup then," Johnny sent back. Daphne read the message and flopped around on her bed, a lovesick grin spreading over her as she hugged a pillow and dangled her feet. Her sister, Astoria Greengrass, poked her head in and said, "Sister, Mum and Dad have Quidditch tickets." Daphne stopped rolling, tossed the pillow aside, and said flatly, "Tear up their tickets," Astoria blinked. "Huh?"